The committee will come to order. The Oversight Committee exists to secure two fundamental principles. First, Americans have a right to know that the money Washington takes from them is well spent. And second, Americans deserve an efficient, effective government that works for them. Our duty on the Oversight and Government Reform Committee is to protect these rights. Our solemn responsibility is to hold government accountable to taxpayers, because taxpayers have a right to know what they get from their government. Our obligation is to work tirelessly in partnership with citizen watchdogs, including the IG's office, to deliver the facts to the American people and bring genuine reform to the Federal bureaucracy. This is our mission statement, and today we are here because a high-ranking EPA official swindled taxpayers. In fact, effectively, he embezzled $800,000 or more over most of his career from the taxpayers. He's here with us today, not as our most important witness, because in fact, what we want to find out in this committee, and the reason that this hearing has great merit, is we want to find out how top officials at the EPA, under multiple administrations, for more than a decade, never verified that a man who said he's a secret agent of the CIA never verified that he was. We also want to find out that big lie was compounded with the big lie, well, an individual was supposedly working for the CIA, also got his pay raised to a level that appears to be above the statutory limit. And I repeat, it appears as though Mr. Beale was paid an amount greater than Congress allows. Just as this committee investigated some months ago CMS allowing for payments greater than the statutory limit to the State of New York, and we do not hold New York accountable alone, we do not hold Mr. Beale accountable alone. No individual and no individual's boss should be able to write anything that allows for somebody to be paid more than the law allows. The lack of internal controls at the EPA, and in fact the lack of external controls in government as a whole, will be the subject not just today, but in the days to come. We hear complaints from the private sector that top EPA officials turn a deaf ear to their concerns about how regulations kill jobs and add enormous costs with little or no benefit. That is an issue that we will deal with many times as we address the EPA. But today it appears as though there was a deaf ear taken to somebody not working. In fact, evidence shows, and we will hear from the Inspector General, evidence shows that beyond even the craziness of somebody saying they had to be gone for weeks or months at a time because they, quote, worked for another agency, not doing their job but still being paid, and in fact not being billed back to the CIA. Over and above that, we understand there was actually a retirement ceremony in which the individual retired and then convinced the now director and others that he should continue being paid because he wasn't really retired. His retirement from the CIA was awaiting a replacement. To my understanding, your first replacement was killed by the Taliban, and we're really sorry for the loss of that non-existent secret agent to replace a non-existent secret agent. It is not our desire ordinarily to call anyone before Congress simply to ridicule them. But I believe that today there is a degree of ridicule of top individuals at the EPA, and I fear top individuals and lower individuals throughout government if, in fact, we cannot make a government-wide search to see if this has happened before. One thing that I've found in the many years in which I manufactured consumer electronics, there's no such thing as one defect. There's no such thing as everything's perfect except the one you got, ma'am. There's no such thing as, well, you have, this is the first time we've had a report of this defect or this problem. Here, I believe the lack of controls at the EPA almost guarantee that others did not do their job and fell through the crack. We have an agenda on this side of the dais, which is we'd like to have union officials keep time cards to show how much time they spend doing union work versus the work of agencies. That has not passed the Congress, and it may not. But finding out if people do work should. We have learned that Deputy Director Pertusepi, I'll get it better in time, and now Administrator McCarthy worked extremely close with Mr. Beale for years. In fact, in 2009 through 2012, Ms. McCarthy was John Beale's direct supervisor at the Office of Air and Radiation, where he was senior official. This office is responsible for the most sweeping regulations affecting business. As we look at a history of working closely with names we all know, including direct report to people that continue to be in the office today, what we find interesting is if Mr. Beale could perpetrate outright lies with impunity, what did he do in his daily work life on those rare days in which he actually performed work for the EPA? We need to get to the bottom of this because we owe it to the American people. We need to discover, in fact, whether individuals like Mr. Beale and others not performing work are now sitting in retirement collecting paychecks in retirement for work they did not do and thus a retirement they did not earn. Finally, I want to thank the Inspector General for the work done. It is our report that, in fact, your investigation began delayed because at a time when you should have been informed, the General Counsel and others were being consulted around you. And for that, we want to make sure that it is clearly understood that going to a lawyer when you discover something is not a substitute for also going to the IG. This committee supports the Inspector General's offices and their work, the 12,000 men and women who independent of Congress and, quite frankly, whenever possible, independent of their employers in the executive branch, seek to root out waste, fraud, and abuse is essential to this committee. There is no partisan divide on the work of the IGs, and we will work on a bipartisan basis to ensure that administrations, Republican and Democratic, understand IGs are never to be kept in the dark. When there is an allegation of even a portion as onerous as this one, IGs have to be brought in at the beginning, not when it's about to become public. It also is disturbing to me that Mr. Brenner, back in the 70s, when you and Mr. Beale went to Princeton, you began a friendship. A friendship should, in fact, require that when you're the superior of somebody who you help bring into the agency, that you look with a little more scrutiny, that, in fact, you are more likely to know that what somebody is saying isn't true. And I find it astonishing of that. Additionally, during our investigation and with the help of the Inspector General, we became aware of what appears to be an inappropriate acceptance of an $8,000 gift, a discount on a Mercedes-Benz, from an outside lobbyist. My understanding is this was not done with the pre-approval or cooperation directly of Mercedes-Benz, but it is our intention to use our power to do investigation beyond that which the IG has authority. If it were up to me, the IG would have had authority to interview all of you, or both of you, even as you sought retirement to escape his jurisdiction. One of the reasons you're here today is, in fact, that the IG Act has certain limitations. It cannot compel former members of government to speak to them. It cannot go between agencies and, in fact, is very stovepiped. It is our intention to move legislation that expands the ability of IGs to gain subpoena authority, and that authority should extend to investigations that begin within their agencies, but which have tentacles in other agencies and with former employees, particularly when those employees' very paychecks are what is in question. So I want to thank my ranking member for being patient as I went through a little longer opening statement, and I look forward to this hearing and to the work we must do afterwards, and I yield to the ranking member.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, this is a very important hearing, but before I discuss today's hearing, I want to address our current budget situation. Today is the first time the Federal Government has shut down in 17 years. This has happened because a small group of Tea Party Republicans has taken our country hostage as a part of their ideological crusade to overturn the law of the land and put insurance companies back in charge of health care decisions of millions of Americans. The Republican House leadership could have averted this shutdown immediately by simply allowing the House of Representatives to vote on a clean, continuing resolution. Let me say that again. If they put a clean resolution on the floor, it would pass and there would be no government shutdown. But they refuse because they are placing internal Republican politics ahead of the best interests of our nation and our economy. So this morning, 800,000 hard-working, middle-class Federal workers who would have been at their duty stations providing vital services to the American people are furloughed. Many of them are my constituents, and things will only deteriorate from here. I agree that our committee has a constitutional duty to provide oversight, and hearings like this one are a key part of that oversight. But it seems odd for our committee to be here today acting like nothing is different and pretending that we are just going about our business as usual. I want to make clear that a government shutdown is not business as usual, and we should not treat it that way. I urge my colleagues on the other side of the aisle to ask your leadership to put a clean CR on the floor and end this shutdown today. With that said, let me turn to today's hearing. I want to begin by thanking Inspector General Elkins and his deputy, Patrick Sullivan, for investigating this gross abuse of taxpayer funds. I also want to acknowledge the Department of Justice for successfully prosecuting Mr. Beale, who pleaded guilty last Friday and will be forced to pay back the almost $900,000 in funds he stole. In funds he stole from the American people. In addition, I want to acknowledge the role of Administrator McCarthy in finally revealing this fraud, which lasted incredibly for decades. I know we will discuss the Inspector General's concerns about how quickly his office received a referral, but I believe that the IG will agree that had it not been for Administrator McCarthy, this fraud may never have been uncovered. Mr. Beale's betrayal of the public trust for his own personal enrichment is truly shocking in its scope, duration, and sheer audacity. It is amazing. Mr. Beale defrauded the Environmental Protection Agency for decades under both Republican and Democratic administrations by claiming he was a covert operative of the CIA. One senior EPA official during the Bush administration actually approved Mr. Beale's request to work off-site 1 day a week so he could participate in an interagency special advisory group working on a project with the Directorate of Operations at the CIA. Give me a break. This was no ordinary ruse. In addition to lying, he stole and lied, lying to senior EPA officials across multiple administrations. Mr. Beale also duped his own family members, his friends, and even his own lawyer. That's a lot of duping. Mr. Beale did not come clean to his own criminal defense attorney until investigators arranged for a meeting at CIA headquarters in Langley, Virginia, in order to finally confront him about his lies. But that's not all Mr. Beale did. It's not all that he lied about. According to the Inspector General, Mr. Beale also lied about contracting malaria and serving in Vietnam, all to obtain a handicapped parking spot. Oh, my God. Mr. Beale also lied on travel vouchers about where he was going and why he needed to go there so he could visit his family in California. Simply put, Mr. Beale was a con artist, and the American taxpayers were his mark. As public servants, we must always remember that we serve the people. Mr. Beale flouted one of the most basic tenets of government service. It's not your money. It's the taxpayers' money. It's people that go out there, the ones that I saw this morning when I left home at 5 o'clock, getting the early bus. It's their money, and you stole it. Mr. Beale's actions are an insult to the thousands of hardworking and dedicated public servants across the country, and an insult to our CIA agents around the world. While Mr. Beale was claiming to work at Langley and pretending to go on secret missions overseas, real intelligence agents were hunting down Osama bin Laden and battling al-Qaeda in the most dangerous places in the world. Mr. Beale's impersonation of a CIA agent forced our nation's law enforcement and intelligence officials to spend their scarce time and resources uncovering his fraud instead of combating real threats around the globe. This is truly reprehensible. I'm gratified that justice has been served and that Mr. Beale will pay for his fraud, for his lies, for his theft. However, our inquiry cannot end there. We need to understand how EPA's system failed to catch him earlier and examine additional reforms. Although the Inspector General's audit work is still ongoing, I look forward to hearing about his initial recommendations and to hearing from the Deputy Administrator of EPA about steps the agency has already taken and plans to take to safeguard taxpayer dollars from this type of fraud in the future. As I close, let me say I urge my colleagues to refrain from using Mr. Beale to make generalizations about government workers. Mr. Beale is an aberration, not a rule. The vast majority of federal employees dedicate their lives to serving the public. They come to work every day. They give it everything they got because they realize it's bigger than them. It's not about them. It's bigger. They're honest. They're hardworking, and they would never even contemplate breaching the public trust in this manner. And so, Mr. Chairman, with that, I look forward to the testimony and I yield back.
I thank the gentleman, and I join with him in saying on a day in which hundreds of thousands of Federal workers are on furlough without pay, we don't take this as an ordinary day, but perhaps an appropriate day to have somebody who furloughed himself with pay time and time again. Members will have 7 days to submit opening statements for the record, and will now recognize our first panel of witnesses. The Honorable Arthur A. Elkins, Jr. is the Inspector General for the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. Welcome. Mr. Patrick Sullivan is Deputy Inspector General of Investigations at the EPA and oversaw had primary responsibility for this investigation. Mr. Mark Kaminsky, who is sitting behind the two IGs, is a special agent with the Office of the Inspector General at EPA. He may be called to answer questions because of his direct contact in this investigation, and will also be sworn in when the others are sworn in. The Honorable Robert Persepi is the Deputy Administrator of the United States Environmental Protection Agency. We get so used to saying EPA around here. And Mr. Robert Brenner is the former Director of Policy Analysis and Review at the Air Radiation Division of the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. And our primary witness, Mr. John C. Beale, is the former Senior Policy Advisor at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency and allegedly the CIA. With that, and pursuant to the committee rules, would all of you, including Mr. Kaminsky, please rise to be sworn and raise your right hands. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you are about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you. Please be seated. Let the record reflect that all witnesses answered in the affirmative. This is a large panel, and even with some not making opening statements, we're going to consume a lot of time. So I'd ask you to keep your opening statements as close to 5 minutes or less as possible. Your entire written statements will be placed in the record, in addition to any comments that you may want to give us afterwards. We'll hold the record open. I'll announce that at the end for a couple of days. Mr. Elkins.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman Issa, Ranking Member Cummings, and members of the committee. I am Arthur Elkins, Inspector General of the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. I am pleased to appear before you today to discuss some of the recent important work of the Office of Inspector General. In particular, I will highlight the audit work that ensued as a direct result of the OIG's criminal investigation of former EPA employee John C. Beale. The EPA's Assistant Inspector General for Investigations, Patrick Sullivan, whose testimony will follow mine, will provide more specific details of the investigation that led Beale's guilty plea on September 27, 2013. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to share with you the OIG's various efforts to safeguard the EPA and the U.S. Chemical Safety and Hazard Investigation Board from fraud, waste, and abuse through independent oversight of their programs and operations. Before I begin, I would like to commend the expertise, diligence, and professionalism of the OIG staff, whose exceptional work serves as the foundation of my testimony this morning. Once my office learned about the serious allegations made against Beale, the OIG's Office of Investigations immediately launched and quickly completed a successful investigation of what you will certainly agree to be an egregious and almost unbelievable case. As a result of this investigation, the OIG's Office of Audit has mobilized to aggressively assess the various internal control issues at the EPA that allowed this highly troubling scenario to occur. My testimony will primarily detail the subsequent work that will be conducted by the OIG's Office of Audit as a result of the investigation. I also received a congressional request that the OIG immediately launch an investigation into the agency's policies and processes that facilitated Beale's fraud. The Office of Investigations requested audit assistance to address the following potential EPA systemic weaknesses: EPA's retention bonuses, the statutory annual pay limit, EPA's first-class travel, EPA's process for approval of foreign travel, EPA's vetting process for new employees, time and attendance issues, timely referrals of potential criminal allegations to the OIG, and authority of EPA's Office of Homeland Security. In September 2013, the OIG's Office of Audit sent a notification letter to the agency stating our plan to begin preliminary research on various administrative areas as a result of recent actions taken against a former EPA employee. We are also currently performing work to address the first part of the congressional request. We have reviewed the OIG's Office of Investigation's case files to determine how the fraud took place, what internal controls existed, what controls may need strengthening, and what controls were compromised, circumvented, or overridden. On completion of this part of the request, we will provide a letter to the requester which will address the facts concerning how the fraud occurred. The estimated date for the issuance of this letter will be October 31, 2013, barring any delays due to the possible shutdown of the government and the EPA's cooperation. We just started our preliminary research for the second part of the congressional request. We will keep the committee updated on the audit's estimated completion. Further, this audit may uncover other issues that I have not detailed this morning. Accordingly, we may issue early warning reports on time and attendance and travel as it relates to Beale. This investigation has also resulted in several investigations related to administrative matters. As these are ongoing investigations, I am unable at this juncture to discuss them, but will do so when I can. My testimony today highlights the OIG's commitment to continue to shine a light on EPA and the CSB to guarantee that our tax dollars are being well spent so that a scenario such as the Beale case should not happen again. Funding to the OIG clearly represents a great value to the American taxpayer. I ask the committee to please keep in mind that additional budget cuts may force us to focus on statutory work and reduce discretionary work, such as requests from Congress to investigate agency programs or operations. In conclusion, I would like to reaffirm the OIG's commitment to add value and assist the agency in accomplishing its mission of safeguarding the health of the American people and protecting the environment. We take very seriously our mandate to promote economy, efficiency, and effectiveness, and prevent and detect fraud, waste, and abuse through independent oversight of the EPA's programs and operations. Mr. Chairman, this concludes my prepared statement. I will be pleased to answer any questions you or the members may have. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Sullivan.
Chairman Issa, Ranking Member Cummings, members of the committee, I'm Patrick Sullivan, Assistant Inspector General for Investigations at EPA. The EPA's OIG investigation of this case has included more than 40 interviews, the review of thousands of documents, and coordination with many federal law enforcement agencies. On September 27th, Mr. Beale entered a plea of guilty to one count of theft of government funds. The activities relevant to this case began in 1988 when Mr. Beale was hired as a consultant to the EPA by his close friend Robert Brenner, then Director of EPA's Office of Policy Analysis and Review, and continued until Mr. Beale's retirement in April of 2013. Our investigation revealed that Mr. Beale engaged in the following misconduct: false official statements, time card fraud, incentive retention bonus fraud, travel voucher fraud, false personation of a federal official, and misuse of an official government passport. Mr. Beale's official personnel file contains numerous misleading and false statements, including a claim that he worked for a U.S. Senator. Over a period of 22 years, Mr. Beale received a retention incentive bonus amounting to 25% of his salary. Evidence suggests Mr. Beale was only authorized to receive this bonus for 6 years, costing the government approximately $500,000. Mr. Beale's work on the Clean Air Act in the early 1990s gained him significant prestige. Starting in 1994, he began the false personation of a CIA employee, lying to even his wife and closest friends, in addition to his EPA colleagues. He told OIG investigators that he perpetrated this lie to, quote, puff up the image of myself, unquote. The investigation revealed Mr. Beale was absent from the EPA for long periods of time between 2000 and 2013 under his alleged CIA cover. During this time, Mr. Beale lied to several high-ranking EPA officials about his work for the CIA, including former Assistant Administrators Jeff Homestead and Gina McCarthy. Subsequent investigative interviews revealed Mr. Homestead shared Mr. Beale's claim CIA status with other EPA executives, and it became, quote, an open secret, unquote, in EPA that Mr. Beale worked undercover for the CIA. When Gina McCarthy became Assistant Administrator for the Office of Air and Radiation in 2009, she was told during her orientation process and subsequently by Mr. Beale himself that he worked for the CIA. Additionally, an executive assistant who worked for Mr. Beale recalled that he had told her he needed to stay on with the CIA until his replacement, who had been captured and was being tortured in Pakistan, had recovered. She responded, quote, "John, that's what movies are made of," unquote. When interviewed by OIG investigators, Mr. Beale admitted to taking off a total of 2.5 years for non-existent CIA work at a cost to the taxpayers of approximately $350,000. Mr. Beale also stated that during these periods he actually was working around the house, riding his bicycle, and reading books. Concurrent with his frequent absences from the EPA, Mr. Beale received a substantial cash award, including a Presidential Rank Award of $28,000, all on top of his salary and a 25% retention incentive bonus. Mr. Beale perpetuated the lie that he had contracted malaria in Vietnam during his service in the U.S. Army, using it both as another reason for his frequent absences and used it to obtain a handicapped parking permit at EPA. Mr. Beale never had malaria. He never served in Vietnam. Over time, the parking space cost the taxpayers and the government approximately $18,000. Mr. Beale also committed travel-related fraud. For example, we were able to confirm that he charged more than $80,000 in trips between 2005 and 2007 to California. All these trips to California were fraudulent. He traveled there to visit his elderly parents who lived in Bakersfield. Another example, Mr. Beale usually stayed at hotels that far exceeded the allowable government lodging rate. In one instance, he charged the government $1,066 per night for 4 nights in London, even though he had the opportunity to stay at a different hotel at $375 per night. When confronted with this outrage by our investigators, Mr. Beale stated, quote, "Even I am outraged at this," unquote. From approximately 1998 until his retirement in 2013, Mr. Beale claimed he had a back injury requiring first-class airplane accommodations. He provided medical documentation from a chiropractor supporting this claim. Due to Mr. Beale's undertaking extensive physical activities and his many other deceptions regarding his health, his claim is dubious at best. In one example, when he traveled from Washington to London, his first-class ticket was 14 times higher than the coach fare. The government was charged $14,000 for this one ticket, as opposed to $1,000 had he taken a coach flight. Mr. Beale was never held accountable for his spending on these trips. When interviewed, those responsible for approving his travel vouchers acknowledged that the charges he submitted often seemed excessive, but they were never questioned because he was a highly respected EPA senior official and based on his work for the CIA. That concludes my remarks, Chairman. I'll be happy to answer questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you. Mr. Brenner.
Good morning, Chairman Issa, Ranking Member Cummings, and distinguished committee members. I am Rob Brenner, and I served as Director of EPA's Office of Policy Analysis.
Could you pull the mic a little closer, please, for everyone? Thank you.
From 1988 until my retirement 2 years ago. Today, I am voluntarily appearing before the committee solely in my individual capacity. I am very proud of my career in public service, my accomplishments, and the accomplishments of the team that I was a part of. My career at EPA was defined by the opportunity to play a key role in the development, congressional passage, and implementation of the bipartisan Clean Air Act amendments of 1990, legislation that has prevented millions of premature deaths and illnesses. During the implementation phase, I designed and led programs to provide business opportunities and economic incentives for U.S. companies, support technological innovation, reduce toxic exposures for communities, and monitor the Clean Air Act's costs and benefits for the U.S. taxpayers. I am also fortunate to have been well recognized for those efforts. I received a gold medal from EPA, meritorious and distinguished public service awards from 3 different presidents, and a Distinguished Career Service Award from then Assistant Administrator Gina McCarthy and Administrator Lisa Jackson. Of course, those accomplishments are far from mine alone. Just as meaningful to me are the many notes of thanks I continue to receive from exceptional individuals I recruited, managed, and mentored during my 30-plus years at EPA. In 1987, One of the people I recruited to assist with those efforts was John Beale. John and I met in graduate school, where he was working on both a master's degree in public affairs and a law degree as part of a scholarship program. We became good friends, and we worked together on a foundation program to identify and recognize leaders in the area of energy and environmental policy. After graduate school, we stayed in touch, and from the early 1980s until about 1989, we saw each other about once a year at a vacation home we co-owned in Massachusetts. I want to take this opportunity to describe why John's recent conviction for post-2000 thefts from EPA is so inexplicable for his friends and colleagues, including me. The answer is that period was preceded by more than a decade of effective and highly regarded work. During that time period, John co-directed the agency's Clean Air Working Group during the challenging 1989 to 1990 clean air legislative process. He developed many strong relationships at EPA, on the Hill, and with stakeholders, and he became a frequent and well-respected participant in clean air strategy meetings at the White House. After that, he provided strategic advice on several key rulemakings to implement the Clean Air Act, created and managed the process that brought together the auto industry, states, and the environmental community to create the National Low-Emitting Vehicle Program. He played a central role in the development of the landmark national health standards for ozone and particulates, and he became a highly regarded member and a frequent leader of U.S. teams negotiating international environmental and energy agreements and protocols. Yet after 2000, this exceptional record turned into one that resulted in John's pleading guilty to years of deception and hundreds of thousands of dollars of theft, based in part on his claim that he worked for the CIA. The question then becomes, how could anyone at EPA believe that John was involved in national security work? And the answer is that if it had been anyone else, it almost certainly would not have been credible. But John had established a track record that made him one of the most highly regarded members of the EPA. Moreover, he had served in the military, he had been an undercover policeman, and he had worked at the U.S. Attorney's Office in New York, the type of background I would have expected of someone doing national security work. While I am in no way trying to defend the conduct which is the basis for this guilty plea, I am saddened and disappointed that John's good works and contributions at EPA will be overshadowed by these unfortunate events. And at this time, I'm prepared to answer any questions.
Thank you. Mr. Beale, do you have an opening statement?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. No, I do not have an opening statement.
Before I go to Mr. Presepi, Mr. Beale, it's my understanding that you may intend to assert your constitutional privilege to remain silent. Is that correct?
Yes, it is, Mr. Chairman. In the letters from September 23rd and 24th, I think my attorney advised the committee of that fact, and I will be asserting my Fifth Amendment privilege this morning.
And is it my understanding that you have already, as earlier stated, you've already pled guilty to the charges before you?
Mr. Chairman, I respectfully have to make the same statement that I'm asserting my Fifth Amendment privileges this morning.
Mr. Beale, today's hearing will cover the topics including the U.S. EPA, the Inspector General's investigation of your employment at the EPA. As a senior policy advisor in EPA's Office of Air and Radiation, you were uniquely qualified to provide us testimony that would help the committee better understand your conduct while at the EPA as an employee. To that end, I must ask that you consult with your attorney, recognizing that although you have already pled guilty and, by definition, are not subject to prosecution for these very areas we're investigating, we do have a need to find out whether not you, but other individuals participated or in some way aided in your ability to do this. Those areas of our investigations are clearly not subject to protection for you against self-incrimination, but in fact are the legitimate requirements of government to ensure that this does not happen again. So I would ask you to consult with your attorneys as to whether or not you are prepared to help in this investigation, or whether, having already pled guilty, you continue to assert that you would be incriminated from something you have already pled guilty to. Would you please seek counsel and then give me your answer?
Mr. Chairman, could I ask the Chair a question?
Of course.
Was there a written plea agreement between the government and Mr. Beale?
Under Federal rules, the sentencing guidelines are not mandatory in a plea agreement, but he did enter one.
Is there a requirement that he cooperate in that plea agreement? Is he looking for a 5K 1.1 or a Rule 35 at some point?
It's my understanding that cooperation is part of the consideration for the sentencing, not yet to happen.
Is there a transcript of the plea colloquy between he and the judge when he entered his change of plea?
If the counsel can make us aware of that behind Mr. Beale.
It is my understanding that there is a transcript, but we don't have a copy of it right now.
Counsel, you're not sworn, but if you could answer the gentleman's question as a member of the bar, it would be helpful for us to dispense with this.
Mr. Chairman, there is no 5K1 component to the plea agreement. It's a straight-up plea agreement that doesn't require any additional testimony or information from Mr. Beale.
Did he receive a reduction in his guideline points for acceptance of responsibility?
He did.
Was it the super acceptance or the 2-point acceptance?
It was 3 points, 2 plus 1.
And is any part of that receiving a reduction in his sentence for cooperation that doesn't include answering questions when he's not in jeopardy in a congressional committee hearing?
No. It only requires acceptance of responsibility as contemplated by the guidelines.
Mr. Chairman, I'd love to have a copy of that plea agreement if we could get one, and I'm sure that other attorneys on this panel and non-attorneys would like to see it as well.
Thank you. I'm going to, Mr. Gowdy, I'm going to direct staff to get that. And obviously, it's of our interest that the U.S. Attorney's Office not enter an agreement that would in some way allow what is occurring here to occur. Mr. Cummings, do you have any questions?
Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to enter into the record going to Mr. Gowdy, and I think Mr. Gowdy makes excellent inquiry, because I was wondering the same things. We've got the letter of September 23rd, 2013 from Mr. Kern, I guess that's his counsel. September 24th, 2013 from Mr. Kern to the committee. And then this is a statement of the offense. I think we ought to have that as a part of the record.
Without objection, they'll all be placed in the record. Do you have any other questions?
No, I just, no, I don't. I do have one question, Mr. Chairman. To the counsel. Counsel, would you identify yourself, please?
Yes, John Kern on behalf of Mr. Beale.
And so okay, fine. Is there any, part of our problem here is that we're trying to prevent this from happening again. So there is no requirement anywhere for him to cooperate with anybody with regard to how he accomplished what he allegedly accomplished, so that we can try to make sure it doesn't happen again? There's no requirement anywhere?
No, there's not.
All right. Very well.
Okay, well, we'll move forward and dispense with this. Mr. Beale, did you serve in Vietnam?
Mr. Chairman, I respectfully decline to answer the question on the basis of the advice of my attorney to assert my Fifth Amendment privilege.
Mr. Beale, did you ever or do you now or did you ever serve with the Central Intelligence Agency as an agent or an operative or in any capacity in which you aided the CIA?
Mr. Chairman, I respectfully decline to answer that question on the basis of my Fifth Amendment privilege.
With that, I have no choice but to relieve you of your position at the dais. We will escort you. You're subject to a deposition, or sorry, subject to a subpoena. So we're going to ask you that you remain and monitor the entire hearings from an ante-room that we're making available to you, along with your attorney. It is the intention of this committee to seek your return for purposes of full disclosure. We will do so in concert with the U.S. Attorney and obviously the trial judge. And with that, we'll take just a 2-minute recess so they can reconvene, reassess how the seating order is.
Mr. Chairman?
Right. Yes.
Just one thing. First of all, I'm hopeful, Mr. Chairman, that after sentencing, we bring him back, because then he's no longer in jeopardy, and we can get the kind of information that we need to assist in the things that you talked about a little bit earlier, making sure this stuff does not happen again, so that we can get as much detail as possible. Then he's not in jeopardy. So I'm hoping that while he's watching, that he's aware that he will likely, and I'm assuming the Chairman would have no objections to bring him once sentencing is over.
Well, and I agree with the gentleman, and the reason for him watching it is so he knows what is said here. The intent is to work with the U.S. Attorney's Office. I believe that the appropriate arrangement should be prior to his sentencing as part of his plea bargain. That is not my decision. It's not your decision, but we will seek to work with the Court. As you know, we delayed this hearing until after the plea bargain in order to make the closure of this portion of the investigation for the Attorney General's, or for the IG's office in place. But we'll take this 2-minute recess and we'll be right back. Thank you. Committee will come to order. We now recognize Mr. Persepi for his opening statement.
Chairman Issa and Ranking Member Cummings and all the members of the committee who are here today, thank you for providing me with the opportunity to appear before you today and to discuss the Environmental Protection Agency's progress in addressing recent issues brought to light by the EPA Inspector General's ongoing investigation involving former EPA employee John C. Beale, as evidenced by EPA's referral of this matter to our Inspector General and our steadfast cooperation with the Inspector General's investigation into this matter. We approach this with great seriousness, and we are approaching corrective actions aggressively to deal with the issues that were raised by Mr. Beale's fraudulent activity. As stewards of the taxpayers' resources, EPA takes seriously our responsibility to ensure that Federal funds are used for the purposes that are appropriate, cost-effective, and important to the agency's mission. The recent Inspector General's investigation, as we know, identified a number of administrative processes and controls which were listed in testimony just a few moments ago that were either insufficient or they were not being effectively used in preventing what appears to be a calculated long-term criminal fraud. While I have not been provided the full details yet of the Inspector General's investigative findings, I am aware of the most significant fraud involved employee pay, including exceeding statutory pay limits, unauthorized extension on retention incentives, time and attendance, government-funded travel. And in nearly all instances, there are policies and procedures in place. However, a number of them may have been ignored, circumvented, or undermined by Mr. Beale's criminal misconduct. At this time, the EPA is fully cooperating with the Inspector General and is looking forward to assessing all findings with a complete commitment to implement appropriate further process improvements and administrative changes necessary to ensure more effective internal controls. While we are waiting for the Inspector General's report and continue to cooperate with them, we don't want to wait to deal with some of the issues that we already know about. So in regard to steps already taken as part of our regular ongoing process of improvements and based on some of the preliminary findings shared, I want to outline a number of actions that we've already begun to take. Back in last year and more recently this year, back in October of last year, I directed the Office of Administration and Resource Management and our Office of Chief Financial Officer to conduct additional reviews of policies and controls for time and attendance, employee pay, and travel. These reviews have resulted in strengthening of existing policies. We've strengthened supervisory control on time and attendance. We've increased oversight of time entry and approval practices, including generation of acceptance reports to assist managers to show whether every employee, whether the employee or their timekeeper entered the employee's time. Each employee who fails to enter his or her own time for 3 pay periods in a single quarter, any instance where a supervisor or time approver failed to approve an employee's time. All of these are now available in exception reports and are an additional series of controls on top of our existing system. These reports will then enable the Office of Chief Financial Officer, working with the employees and supervisors and time approvers, to correct or discover what the issues may be. We have improved review of employee travel, including a requirement now that 100% of all travel vouchers will be audited and all receipts will be submitted by the Chief Financial Officer before payment is authorized. We've tightened retention incentive processes, requiring future retention incentives to be entered into the human resource system with a not-to-exceed date, stop date on the system, generating an exceptions report which will require a human resource specialist to either confirm the recertification has been received or end the incentive payments. And I might add, as an aside, there is nobody at EPA right now receiving incentive payments. We've also ensured a review of gross payment amounts of employees by generating new controls for employee pay to ensure compliance with the statutory pay limits. These documented changes in policies and procedures will also be supported by an array of new training, resources for employees and supervisors, and defined roles and responsibilities associated with our administrative processes. As I indicated previously, our agency is fully committed to strengthening accountability for stewardship of resources entrusted to us by the taxpayers, and we expect fully to be working with the Inspector General as they do their administrative review of this current investigation, and that they will be providing us with additional recommendations beyond the ones I've already mentioned that we've already implemented. So I want to thank you again for allowing me to represent the agency here today, and I'm looking forward to answering your questions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I'll now recognize myself for a series of questions. Mr. Sullivan, you and your deputies, in your investigation, uncovered not just the big lie, the I'm a secret agent man, but you also uncovered these excess payments. Were you able to discover whether whether this was a common overrun, allowing people to fly first class, the nature of how, each of the violations that are unrelated to his not showing up to work. Did your scope of your investigation include any other employees other than Mr. Beale?
Our investigation was targeting Mr. Beale for his alleged criminal conduct, which we have now proven by his guilty plea. The question you are referring to now, I believe, the bigger picture, our Office of Audit is engaged now in a thorough audit of the 7 areas that Mr. Elkins already testified to.
And EPA is audited by an outside accounting firm. Is that correct? Who is it?
I don't know, sir.
Okay, so you don't know if EPA got a clean audit on its spending.
Chairman Issa, my staff conducts the EPA's financial statement audit, so it's done in-house.
Okay, so previously these were simply areas that were not audited thoroughly, obviously.
The specific areas that we're discussing here, no, not. No.
And audit of pay never includes verifying whether you exceed the SES pay cap.
No, we have not conducted an audit on that issue.
Okay. Mr. Perciasepi. Mr. Perciasepi, does your accounting change now catch someone who's paid more than the statutory maximum?
Yes, sir, it would. We've designed it. We've designed these improvements we've been making and the ones that we are now implementing to deal with the most important findings that we know of so far. And so we are, again, I want to keep pointing out that we will expect to learn more, but yes.
Yeah. Mr. Brenner, you said some glowing things about Mr. Beale, including, if it had been anybody but Mr. Beale, you would have not considered his story credible. But isn't it true you were aware that he basically took trips to domestic locations and turned expense accounts in? Were you also aware of his excess spending in excess of the EPA guidelines and or Federal regulations?
No, sir, I was not aware of that.
Mr. Elkins or Mr. Sullivan, do your investigation, who did review and would approve a first-class ticket for 10 times the cost?
We interviewed the individual that signed the vouchers. She told us that because of Mr. Beale's status as an executive and because of his CIA connection, she never actually looked at the vouchers. She just signed them and processed them.
So, in other words, at EPA, his undercover, super-secret status was known by a great many people.
That's a fair statement, Mr. Chairman.
So when our founding fathers said the only way to keep a secret between 2 people is for one to be dead, they didn't understand how the EPA can keep secrets among many people, including people who have no security clearances. In other words, weren't there people at the CIA who have no high-ranking security clearance who were, quote, well aware that he was with the CIA?
Well, if I understand your question, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Beale does not have a security clearance. To our knowledge, he's never had a security clearance. That's correct.
Well, we kind of understand that part on him. But in other words, the people in HR and so on that were approving these excess payments without looking at them, they were told he was in the CIA. So it was an open secret that he was super clandestine secret.
Well, the folks in HR may not have known that, but the people at his level, the executives in the agency,
the person approving the vouchers without looking at them, was high-ranking?
Yes, as a deputy assistant administrator.
So a deputy assistant administrator can, without credible requirements, can approve expenses greater than are supposed to be approved, and nobody behind them needs a justification.
Well, that's what happened, sir.
So there's no control over the American taxpayers for excess at the EPA.
Well, I know that's part of the issue of the audit that Mr. Elkins described is taking place now.
Okay. Mr. Brenner, you yourself received, as I understand, a $9,000 discount or $8,000 discount on a Mercedes-Benz. I understand you drove here in a Mercedes-Benz today. Is it true that you received a discount from through a lobbyist on behalf of Mercedes-Benz on your automobile?
A couple of years ago.
Please turn the mic on for all of us.
I'm sorry, it is on.
I asked if you received a discount. That's pretty much a yes or no. Did you receive a discount on a Mercedes arranged by a lobbyist on an automobile you were purchasing?
As I said, Mr. Chairman, this is an issue that was reviewed and investigated a couple years ago, and my understanding is that the decision was that no further action on it was warranted, and I disclosed it in my 2011 financial disclosure form.
Okay, so today, in the investigation in which we are conducting on EPA, there was an investigation. You have disclosed it in financial documents after the fact. So let's go through this. Did you accept an $8,000 discount for a Mercedes-Benz?
Mr. Chairman, I came here voluntarily today to discuss the issues associated with Mr. Beale. I did not come prepared to discuss this set of issues that, as I said, have already been investigated and a decision had been made on it. And I'm not prepared to discuss those issues today.
Mr. Brenner, we served you with a subpoena, and then you said you'd come voluntarily. I didn't.
No.
Oh, I'm sorry. We threatened a subpoena, I guess.
I'm not aware of that either.
Okay, well, let me go through the script. During the course of the committee's investigation, it's brought to our attention that you allegedly engaged in unethical conduct. According to the report from EPA Inspector General, you accepted an $8,000 discount from Mercedes-Benz. The discount was not offered to the general public and was arranged specifically for you by a lobbyist employed by, Hogan and Lovells, a local law firm. The committee is charged with preventing and investigating waste, fraud, and abuse. The information that we have uncovered during the investigation as a result of the Inspector General's work includes this allegation of improper discount and demonstrates at least one possibility that the culture in which you operated as a supervisor promoted or allowed unethical behavior at the EPA, which Mr. Beale has pled guilty to. At this point, the committee would ask once again, voluntary or otherwise, because we will request you back involuntarily, would you please answer the question, did you receive the discount? Not was it passed by, not was it prosecuted, did you receive the discount?
Mr. Chairman, as I said, that was not an issue I came here today prepared to discuss. I came voluntarily to discuss the matters directly related to Mr. Beale. And if the committee wants to pursue this set of issues, I would ask that be done through my counsel questions.
Is your counsel, are you represented by counsel here today?
I am represented by counsel here today.
Would you please confer with counsel as to whether or not this question, a question which takes no preparation, you know whether or not you received a discount? You said there was an investigation that cleared you. We are inquiring into that because, quite frankly, it was part of the IG's investigation. It is part of the information that was given to us, and it is germane to this hearing. You are not here simply because you were duped by Mr. Beale. You are here as part of the broader investigation about what might be a negligent culture at the EPA as to whether or not the American people's monies are being protected and well spent. Please seek your counsel. We'll wait.
Mr. Chairman, as I noted on my 2011 financial disclosure form, I did receive a discount on a vehicle, and it's described in that form.
And the attorney slash lobbyist to arrange for that, is that somebody that does business with the EPA?
Mr. Chairman, as I said, this is a set of issues that I did not come prepared to discuss in detail with you and the committee.
And we'll stay at a 10,000-foot level. You know the individual. Was it an individual or a firm that did business with the EPA and sought to influence legislation?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, it was an individual who did business with EPA.
Is it your understanding that you are allowed to accept discounts of monetary value from lobbyists or anyone else who does business with your agency that you oversee, and or accept them from something not available to the general public? I'm just asking what you understand the ethics to be.
Mr. Chairman, as I said, this is an issue that was reviewed and investigated by the IG and the Department of Justice, and they came to the conclusion that no further, at least my understanding is, they came to the conclusion that no further action is warranted.
Well, I'm going to go to the ranking member, and I'm not sure that we believe that this is a closed matter, but Mr. Cummings, thank you for your patience through this.
Just to piggyback on just one question, Ms. Elkins. Mr. Brenner said the IG had, it's his opinion that he's been cleared of this. Is that right? Did you do the investigation that he's talking about?
Representative Cummings, I'd like to refer this to Mr. Sullivan.
Oh, Ms. Sullivan? I just didn't know who to ask.
Yes, Mr. Cummings, my office did do the investigation, and Mr. Brenner is not accurate in his resuscitation of the facts. The fact is that the U.S. Department of Justice Public Integrity Section did decline prosecution of Mr. Brenner for accepting the discount. However, we were never able to interview him because he retired prior to us being able to interview him. And once he retired, we no longer had the ability to compel an interview. Our process is that once we get a declination, an employee within the agency is compelled to speak to us because they're no longer in jeopardy of prosecution. And that was indeed our plan, to compel Mr. Brenner's interview with us, but it never happened.
Well, that's very helpful. Thank you very much.
I'd ask unanimous consent the gentleman have his full 5 minutes. Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you very much. Mr. Elkins and Mr. Sullivan, I want to thank you for joining us today. I want to commend you and your team of investigators for your very fine work in uncovering this massive fraud on taxpayers and helping bring Mr. Beale to justice. I'm struck by the audacity of Mr. Beale's lies. According to the criminal plea agreement, and I quote, "For more than 10 years, Beale engaged in a pattern and scheme of deception during which he lied to the United States government, his supervisors, friends, and family about a position he claimed he had with the Central Intelligence Agency." And then, end of quote. It goes on to say that Mr. Beale used his fake CIA job as an excuse to just not show up for work, but he did it for what ended up to be 2.5 years. Is that right?
Yes, sir. At a minimum, 2.5 years. At a minimum.
What does that mean?
That means that the 2.5-year figure was agreed to during negotiations between the United States Attorney and Mr. Beale's defense counsel.
So it's quite possible it could have been more, as you're saying.
It could have been a little bit more, or maybe a little bit, maybe a year or two more, but we agreed on 2.5-year figure.
The idea that Mr. Beale was a secret agent for the CIA seems preposterous to all of us now, but it was a lie, and he kept it going for decades. He fooled pretty much everybody, his employers, his family, and even his criminal defense lawyer. It sounds like Mr. Beale was good at lying. And the more people the more he lied, the more it seems that people believed him. And they went on and on and on, and I guess it became easier to believe. Mr. Sullivan, you interviewed more than 40 current and former EPA employees in connection with your investigation. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And did senior EPA officials across multiple administrations, both Democratic and Republican, believe that Mr. Beale was working for the CIA?
Yes.
So you heard Mr. Brenner talk about what a great guy he was, all this wonderful stuff he had done. Did you get the impression that everybody kind of felt that way when he talked about all of his secret agent stuff and playing James Bond? And I mean, is that because he was such a good guy? They thought. You think that's why everybody just said, "Oh, he's off on another mission"?
Well, sir, I think the best way I can describe it is this. Mr. Beale did very high-quality work for the agency. He got a lot of accolades. And based on our interview with him, he said that wasn't enough. He needed to pop up his image. That's when he assumed the persona as being a CIA undercover agent. It was universally accepted, absolutely universally accepted throughout the agency that he worked for the CIA among the senior executives. The first executive that ever questioned him working for the CIA was, in fact, Gina McCarthy. Beyond her suspicions, everyone else we interviewed flat out believed he worked for the CIA.
So you mean to tell me that somebody could walk in, I could be working for the EPA or some other agency, and say, "You know what, guys, I was the CIA," and nothing is required to
Well, Mr. Cummings, I think
to show that? You follow me?
he began in 1994 with assuming this persona, and he did it a little bit at a time. And finally, when he spoke to Mr. Homestead, who was then assistant administrator in 2001, he crafted a somewhat believable story that the CIA had recruited him to be on this oversight panel. And in fact, he was reviewing undercover operations around the globe as part of his oversight panel that he was recruited to join. Allegedly. Of course, it was all a lie. But Mr. Homestead believed that, and he used that to a springboard more and more time away from the agency.
In fact, the plea agreement described that in 2001, a senior Bush administration official at the EPA granted Beale permission to be out of the office 1 day a week in order to work on, and I quote, "an interagency special advisory group working on a project with the Directorate of Operations of the CIA. Pursuant to this authorization, Mr. Beale began taking 1 day a week off on days he claimed he was working for the CIA, and he did that for many years." Mr. Sullivan, is that right? Do you recall how many years that happened? I know you talked about 2.5 years a little earlier, but
yes, the total, it was a minimum of 2.5 years that was agreed to by his defense counsel and the U.S. Attorney's Office for the plea agreement. He began taking 1 day off a week, and then he gradually morphed into more and more time. There was a period of time for approximately 2 years he never came into the office. That was toward the end of his career.
But that Bush administration official was not alone. The plea agreement said that Mr. Beale was also lying to his family. Mr. Sullivan, was that true? Was Mr. Beale also lying to his family?
That is correct. It is absolutely correct that based on, and we could see that based on email traffic. We never interviewed Mr. Beale's wife. We also had another employee.
Are they still married?
Yes, sir. To my understanding.
You sure?
I do not know. No.
Okay, go ahead.
We also had one other employee who was an administrative person, executive assistant, that did suspect Beale, but she was fairly mid-level rank, and she believed that Beale's travel vouchers were far too excessive, and she brought that to the attention of her immediate supervisor, who was a deputy assistant administrator, the person, in fact, who was signing the vouchers, and her fears were dismissed.
What about his criminal defense attorney? Mr. Sullivan, do you have any understanding of whether, after he had already been caught, Mr. Beale initially lied to him as well? Is that right?
Yes. Mr. Beale maintained the persona of being a CIA agent, and his defense counsel told the U.S. attorney assigned to the case that, please tell the OIG agents to back off because you're interfering with the CIA work. And the U.S. attorney came to us, and we have a great relationship with the CIA Inspector General's office. We discussed the case with them. They'd already told us that he did not work for the CIA, and they had no record of him whatsoever. So we arranged for him to come to Langley in a secure room, and that was the point where Mr. Beale, I think, finally came forward and told his attorney he really did not work for the CIA.
I have one other thing. Ultimately, how did the government force Mr. Beale to face the facts and admit that he was never employed by the CIA? You brought him to the CIA.
No, we said we would. We arranged that. We arranged it to make him feel comfortable, and we had arranged him for a particular day to meet us at the main gate in McLean on 123, and he'd be escorted by one of our agents and a CIA employee, and we'd go to the secure room with Mr. Beale and his attorney.
Can you describe that? I just gotta know. I mean, what was that like?
Well,
So you got a guy who's been lying that he's a part of the CIA. You bring him to the CIA, and now this wonderful meeting where, I mean, tell us what happened.
well, he never showed up because he finally then told his defense counsel that he really didn't work for the CIA. But it came to that point in order to us to get past that bridge, because he maintained with his own counsel that he worked for the CIA.
Clearly, the EPA needed more checks and balances. Is that right, Sullivan?
Yes, sir.
I see you've just been sent a bulletin. What does that say?
It tells cell phone records and locations overseas. During the time he allegedly worked for the CIA, he was in communication with executives at the EPA, and he claimed he was overseas, either in Pakistan or other locations. When we pulled his government cell phone records, we found he was actually at his vacation home in Massachusetts, making the phone calls, claiming that he was overseas.
The chairman said something that I think is so probably quite accurate. He said that a lot of times when he saw a defect, it was probably more than one defect. And I'm just wondering, I mean, when you all look at this, I mean, are you seeing this as an aberration, or are you saying, you know what, there's probably some more of this stuff going on? I mean, did you, Mr. Elkins or Mr. Sullivan, I mean, do you have an impression? In other words, we're trying to make sure it doesn't happen again. And I mean, do you believe that this is just one of these things that happened? This guy was just a phenomenal liar, and he got away with it, or do you think that it's quite possible that there are other situations like this?
Well, Representative Cummings, in our business, we don't really like to deal with speculation. We like to deal with the facts. That's why we are starting our audit. Hopefully, at the end of that audit, we'll be able to shine a light on your question and give you an answer to that question.
So you expect that if the audit would bring, if there are some things like this happening, that audit might provide you with the information you need to be able to answer that. Is that what you're saying?
That is our goal, yes.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
I thank you, and if you'll yield me long enough to pile on a little bit, I think what Mr. Cummings and I are both getting to is the internal controls to prevent each and every one of these abuses from happening appear not to be in place. And obviously, when it's done, Mr. Perciasepe, you've made it clear you're trying to create those internal controls. Obviously, we'd like to find out who else fell between the crack. And then the challenge for us is, Mr. Elkins, you're one of 74 IGs. We figure there's 73 other agencies that need to do some soul searching about internal controls, and that's a big part of the reason that Mr. Cummings and I have you all here today. With that, I'd like to go to the gentleman from North Carolina who's been patiently waiting.
I'd like to yield the balance of my time to the gentleman from Ohio, Mr.
Hey, that's the whole time.
I thank the gentleman. I thank the chairman. Mr. Brenner, do you know Patrick Rahar? And isn't it true that Patrick Rahar is a member of the EPA Clean Air Act Advisory Committee?
He was at one time. He is not a member now.
But he was at one time. Do you know how long he served?
I do not know.
Isn't it true that he was a member back in 1992? Do you know? I mean, our records indicate he was a member in 1992.
I think that's correct.
Okay, you testified that you and Mr. Beale did important work on the Clean Air Act. Did you work with Mr. Rahar back in the early 90s when he was a member of the Clean Air Act Advisory Committee?
Well, that was a forum that met publicly.
Have you worked alongside Mr. Rahar? You said you knew him. Did you work alongside him in his capacity at the Clean Air Act Advisory Committee? In your capacity with the EPA, did you work with him?
I discussed Clean Air Act issues in that public forum with Mr. Rahar and with many other people who were a member of this public advisory committee.
Okay, and let me go back to where the chairman was a little while ago. Have you ever purchased a Mercedes-Benz automobile?
I did.
And Mr. Sullivan, did Mr. Brenner, receive a discount for the purchase of this automobile?
Yes, our investigation revealed he did receive an $8,000. It was titled a VIP discount.
$8,000 VIP discount.
Yes, sir.
And the individual who helped, quote, broker the deal, I'm looking at your report. Can you tell me who that individual was?
It was Mr. Rehar.
Same Mr. Rehar who served on the EPA Advisory Committee?
Yes, sir.
Same Mr. Rehar that Mr. Brenner has known since 1992?
Well, I don't know how long he's known him, but it's the same Mr. Rehar.
Well, you was working at the EPA, and Mr. Rehar has been at the Advisory Committee, was working at the Advisory Committee since 1992. Mr. Brenner, is that accurate, what Mr. Sullivan had to say there? Is everything exactly that way? You got an $8,000 discount from Mercedes-Benz when you purchased this automobile?
Sir, Mr. Rare is somebody who I have known, as you mentioned, since '92, and in fact, before that, he's been a friend of mine throughout that period. And it's true that he was involved in.
So he's a friend.
He's a longtime friend who.
Well, you didn't tell me that a little while ago. Longtime friend?
That's the case, that he's been a friend.
Okay, so let me now I want to come more to the present time when you got the $8,000 discount on the purchase of the Mercedes-Benz, that Mr. Rehar was the broker for that deal, and at the time I worked as a lobbyist for the Daimler Auto Group. At that time, were you also then working on the CAFE standards?
No, sir, I was not, and I'm going to say again that this is an issue that was looked at.
Well, it's our understanding. At that time, you got at the time you got the $8,000 discount. Were you working in the Office of Air and Radiation?
I was working in the Office of Air and Radiation at the time.
And that office had jurisdiction over the CAFE standards?
That office shared jurisdiction with another agency.
But that office was involved in forming the CAFE standards, correct?
But I was not.
Okay, but was your boss, Ms. McCarthy, your direct supervisor, was she involved?
Yes, I believe she was involved in it.
Mr. Sullivan, do you know if Ms. McCarthy knew about the discount that one of her employees got from someone in the auto industry at the time they were working on implementing the CAFE standards for the auto industry?
She did not know about it at the time. We interviewed Ms. McCarthy, and indeed we interviewed every GS-14 employee and above.
When did Ms. McCarthy find out about the special sweetheart deal that Mr. Brenner got from Mercedes-Benz?
It's when we interviewed her.
And when was that? Give me that date.
That was, well, I don't have the report in front of me, sir, but I believe it was in late 2010.
And when did Mr. Brenner again get the special deal?
In 2010.
Same year?
Yes.
Same time they're working on CAFE standards. We had a hearing in this committee. In fact, Mr. Chairman, I'd asked to enter in the record some of the findings from the hearing we had in our subcommittee last Congress on implementation of the CAFE standards.
Without objection, so ordered.
At the same time the CAFE standards were being formed?
Well, sir, I don't have any direct knowledge of the CAFE standards. I didn't have any visibility on that. We were just investigating the allegation that Mr. Brenner took an ethical violation.
Ms. McCarthy knew about it in 2010. Mr. Brenner got the loan, the sweetheart deal, in 2010. CAFE standards were being worked on in 2010 out of Ms. McCarthy's office.
I'll accept that assertion, sir, but we weren't looking at the CAFE standards.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I understand that, but I'm just saying the dates. It all happened at the same time. So here, and Mr. Chairman, I understand I'm out of time, but here's the point. Mr. Rehar, who's on the Clean Air Act Advisory Committee, has known Mr. Brenner for 20-some years, not just known him, close friends, then works as a lobbyist for Major Auto Group at the time the CAFE standards are being implemented. Mr. Brenner, who works in the office of Ms. McCarthy, we're putting together these CAFE standards, gets a sweetheart deal. That's what's going on at the EPA, and that's our concern. With that, I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. We now go to the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Lynch.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank Mr. Elkins and Mr. Sullivan especially for your participation in the hearing this morning. I want to talk a little bit about these retention bonuses and the conditions under which they are granted. There seem to be two conditions based on the regulations and statutes and EPA policy. One of the conditions is that for an employee to receive a retention bonus, that there is the danger that they would be attracted away to private practice and we would lose the benefit of the services. Is that correct, Mr. Elkins? Mr. Sullivan?
Yes, that's the general concept behind the recentive intention bonus.
Okay, and Mr. Perciasepi, the other condition is that that we actually retain the employee. We actually retain them. So in this case, it is, at least you can enlighten me, we did not really dig down and verify whether Mr. Beale's job offers, private sector opportunities were real, number one, and then we didn't verify whether we retained him. It's apparent that he was gone for a year and a half at one stretch. He was not employed. He just left for a year and a half. There's a total of 2.5 years here that he was absent from the workplace. So on the retention bonus, we didn't verify that he deserved it, and then we didn't verify that we retained him. This is a complete collapse, and I'm wondering if you can help me with this.
Well, I think you mentioned the reasons for retention bonus correctly. They're likely to leave. They have offers or some other reason that they're likely to leave. They're performing work that is necessary for the agency. And when there was an approved retention bonus for Mr. Beale, it was in the time frames that you heard several people talking about, including Mr. Sullivan, that he had a high prestige, he was a high-performing individual, and it was not unreasonable to expect that he might be getting retention bonuses.
But for a year and a half, he was puttering around the house reading books. That's not a high performance.
The problem is not in the original rationale for that back in the 90s. The problem is that it kept getting recertified without any recertification process. So it went on through the time period that I think the Inspector General is talking about. So the issues of when he was at work and not at work are not during the initial granting of the retention.
Okay, let me just stop because you're not being helpful. Mr. Sullivan, how did this guy basically absent himself from the workplace for a year and a half, and we didn't pick up on it? He was gone for 2.5 years out of 13 years. How did this happen?
He, again, claimed he was living his alternate lifestyle as the CIA undercover agent, and he claimed he was traveling overseas and doing undercover work, and no one questioned him. And he had free reign. No one questioned Mr. Beale ever. No one questioned his vouchers. No one questioned his time away from the office. No one questioned his lack of work product.
What are we doing now to make sure this doesn't happen again? Mr. Perciasepi.
Yes. Yeah. As I mentioned in my opening statement, and I want to be clear about this because we are working with the IG as they do their review, so we're going to probably learn more. But in advance of that, we've moved ahead and established a number of improvements to our controls. We have controls. They were not followed. So we've added additional levels of control. And on a retention bonus, we put a hard stop in that they need to be renewed every year, and they only have a 3-year duration.
Yeah, that was always in there.
Right. That's always in there. What didn't happen in the early part of the last decade is that nobody ever reviewed those. So what we now have in the system is a hard stop. If they don't get reviewed, the payment stops.
Okay, we need to do a lot more. Look, I only got 20 seconds left. What kills me is there actually are employees, whether they're doctors at the VA or finance people at SEC, that we actually do need to pay retention bonuses to retain them because of the value they bring to the government and to the taxpayer. This is just disgraceful that we've undermined it in this fashion. So you've got to clean up your act. Thank you. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. We now go to the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Jordan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Sullivan, I'm going to come back to you. At the time that this, and I'd also, well, we entered the report, but I'll come back to that maybe, Mr. Chairman. But Mr. Sullivan, did you recommend prosecution for the sweetheart deal that Mr. Brenner got with Mercedes-Benz and that Mr. Rehar facilitated with the Daimler Auto Group?
That was a joint investigation we had with the FBI. It was opened up, a file was opened up in the Public Integrity section of the Department of Justice.
Right.
We believed we had enough evidence to prove a crime. The U.S. Attorney's Office, the Public Integrity section declined prosecution, and the FBI dropped out of the case, and it left us with an administrative
But in your
case.
professional opinion, you felt it should have proceeded with prosecution.
Well, we presented the facts, and that decision is always up to the Justice
I
Department.
understand that, but I mean, you're a good lawyer. I can tell. You're testifying here today. You know what you're talking about. In your professional judgment, you felt it should have moved forward.
I think there was merit to move forward, yes, sir.
Okay, and just refresh my memory again. What date did you recommend that? Did you send this on and the decision was made? What was the date?
The declination, again, on my file in front of me, the declination happened sometime in 2011.
In 2011, okay.
Yes.
Mr. Brenner, when did you step down?
I retired from EPA in August of 2011.
So this declination that Mr. Sullivan talked about was before you retired?
I'm not sure exactly
Mr.
when
Sullivan, could you answer
the
that?
declination took place.
Yes, the declination happened before Mr. Brenner retired.
Okay. Well, let me go, Mr. Sullivan. Was there talk, when you talked with Ms. McCarthy about this incident, was there talk of disciplining Mr. Brenner? Any type of disciplinary action? I mean, here you got the Inspector General who thinks it should be prosecuted. Was there any disciplinary action taken?
Well, let me explain how it works. When we work a criminal investigation, we concentrate on that first. And when we interviewed Ms. McCarthy the first time, it was based on the fact trying to develop evidence for potential crime. The second time we spoke to Ms. McCarthy about this, it was after the declination had been issued, and it was after Mr. Brenner had retired. At that point, we were looking at a potential administrative violation. We also endeavored to determine if any other employee in the Office of Air and Radiation had accepted a VIP discount. Therefore, we interviewed every GS-14 and above, any supervisor, and that was in excess of 50 people, and there was no evidence anyone else accepted a discount.
Mr. Brenner, were you disciplined in any way for the loan deal with Mercedes-Benz? With the discount that you got when you purchased the automobile, was there any type of disciplinary action taken?
No, sir.
And no talk of any, getting fired or any type of disciplinary action at all?
No, sir. As I said, it was investigated, and the Department of Justice declined to take further action on it.
And did you get any type of bonus when you, in 2011, when your retirement comes due, or in that calendar year?
I don't remember what bonuses I might have received in that year.
Mr. Sullivan, how many people directly report, when you were doing this investigation, how many directly report to Ms. McCarthy? When she was running the Office of Air and Radiation, how many people directly reported to her?
It's my understanding it's in excess of 1,000.
Okay. But direct reports, the people right
Direct
underneath.
report, she had 3 Deputy Assistant Administrators.
And who were those 3 Deputy Assistant Administrators?
Well, at one time, there was Mr. Brenner, Mr. Beale, and a Miss, and another lady.
So 2 of the 3 had significant problems. 2 of the 3 that directly reported to her, Mr. Beale and Mr. Brenner.
Subsequent investigations uncovered that. That's correct.
Okay. I just want to do one last thing, if I could, Mr. Chairman. Let's put on the screen. This is what amazes me. Not only does Ms. McCarthy know that this takes place, if we could put that up, the invitation for. So this is the invitation for the retirement party, and at the bottom you can see where it mentions Gina McCarthy as head of the thing. So not only Ms. McCarthy only has 3 people who report directly to her. 2 of them were here today. 1 left already, Mr. Beale. The other is Mr. Brenner. Mr. Brenner gets a sweetheart deal from Mercedes-Benz, facilitated by Mr. Rehar, who's been an advisor to the EPA since 1992 and a close friend of Mr. Brenner. All this goes on. The IG recommends prosecution. No discipline, no disciplinary action taken at all for Mr. Brenner. In fact, they throw him a party. They throw him a party when he retires. That's what's going on at our environmental.
Would the gentleman yield?
Environmental protection. I would yield to the Chairman. I yield back to the Chairman.
My understanding is he didn't retire. This was the non-retirement retirer, Mr. Beal, who everyone knew
Well, for
stayed on
Mr.
the
Beal,
payroll.
for Mr. Beal, but not for Mr. Brenner.
That's correct. We now go to the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Connolly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Perciasepe, part of me feels we're a little bit fiddling while Rome is burning because, of course, we're now on the first day of a complete government shutdown. And while the sordid details of this case are fascinating and should be dealt with and are a worthy topic of congressional attention and oversight, Mr. Perciasepe, does the shutdown cost EPA money on a daily basis?
The shutdown costs the American people on a daily basis.
Is there a dollar estimate for just the EPA?
I don't have a dollar estimate.
Mr. Sullivan or Mr. Elkins, any idea of what it costs EPA every day we're shutting down?
I don't have that number available.
Would it be fair to suggest that it far exceeds what we're looking at here today in terms of the estimated cost of Mr. Beale's fraud?
I would say that the cost would be substantial.
Would the gentleman yield for a question?
Yes, sir.
Isn't it true the CBO scores a savings for every day that 800,000 employees are not being paid? I agree with the gentleman, by the way, that we should not be in shutdown, that the important work of the EPA and other agencies would like to have them back to work as soon as possible. But I'm not sure. I'm not sure we have the right panel to analyze the cost-benefit analysis.
I know the Chairman will appreciate it. I wanted to reclaim my time right after you said that. Okay, I'm glad we're in agreement. But I think it's fair to say that there's also a cost associated, both tangible and intangible, with the shutdown. And I think it's really important we put this hearing in that context. I think it's also important to really guard against taking an egregious particular case and then generalizing. There are former members of Congress, even from the Chairman's home state, who were incarcerated for being criminals, who were engaged in criminal activities. And to take that particular case and then say, well, then all of Congress must be complicit. Let's start making sure that we include in our accusations and insinuations that all of them are corrupt would be a false premise.
Would the gentleman yield further for one moment?
If the Chairman,
of course, I will.
I thank you, Chair.
Stop the clock. I would bring to the gentleman's attention, I believe it may have been before you arrived here, that the Congress took up what we often call the Duke-Cunningham law, so that any member of Congress who disgraces and embezzles and or receives gifts in return for their favors as voters would in fact forfeit their pension. So never again we will have that. And that's a big part of what, and I've offered some legislation for the ranking member to consider, we're trying to do, is to recognize that never again should somebody retire on a 22-year retirement, as Mr. Beale did, when in fact he didn't work for 22 years.
And I really appreciate the point of the Chairman, because I'd be glad to join with the Chairman and the ranking member in such legislation. I think that's exactly the corrective kind of action we ought to be looking at. What we shouldn't be doing is trying to paint with a guilty brush by insinuation the guilt of Mr. Beale and perhaps others. We have to be very careful about that, and that's the point I was making. And I know the Chairman would agree with me that those who might conclude we're all, to be painted with the same brush, that would be a false assertion, no matter the temptation of the public to look cynically at a Congress when individual examples of corruption occur. That's the point I'm trying to make. Mr. Perciasepe, is EPA rampant with corruption? Was this a circle of conspiracy that Mr. Beale was only the sort of the tip of the iceberg?
At the core of this matter is an individual who deliberately and with calculation defrauded EPA and the American taxpayer. I'm not able to say how much further that went because that's still under review, but we have policies and controls in place. So
stipulated. Mr. Sullivan and Mr. Elkins, any evidence of a conspiracy, that this is wider than just Mr. Beale?
Sir, that's why we're conducting our audit. Hopefully, within the very near future, we'll be able to give you an answer to that question.
So right now, you don't have an answer to that question.
No, I don't, because we haven't completed the audit.
Final question, if I may, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Brenner, you indicated, did I understand your testimony correctly, that you vacationed together with Mr. Beale? Could you turn on your microphone, Mr. Brenner?
Sorry. I said that occasionally John Beale and I had vacationed together at a house that we co-owned in Massachusetts.
Over what period of time?
The time I was referring to was in the 1980s.
1980s, for the whole decade? Was this a regular thing, or it just happened once?
No,
we're trying to get at how well you knew Mr. Beale.
I think it was about once a year from that period, from about 1983 until about 1989. But I've said that I knew Mr. Beale very well.
And if the Chair would just indulge one final question. You indicated in your testimony that starting in 1988 through roughly the year 2000, you felt that Mr. Beale was a solid professional and did good work. Is that correct?
That's correct.
But starting in 2000, you saw a change. Something changed. Is that correct?
I don't know that I personally saw anything after 2000. What I was describing is that I was Mr. Beale's supervisor through the 1990s. And after that, I was no longer his supervisor. So what I am saying is during the time that I was his supervisor in the 90s, there were a lot of noteworthy accomplishments that Mr. Beale deserves credit for in many different areas. He was highly regarded. After 2000, though, I was no longer his supervisor. And I said in my testimony, given his plea, that, of course, something went dramatically wrong in terms of his performance at EPA. He pled guilty to fraud.
Yes, I understand that. But did you observe that at the time, this change in your friend? Or is this something you just were made aware of retrospectively?
No, I did not observe that myself. That was retrospective.
That's what I want to get.
I thank the gentleman.
I thank the Chair.
Please note, the gentleman, that I majored in indulgence here.
You have been
With
most
that,
indulgent.
with that,
Thank you,
we
Mr.
recognize the gentleman from Utah, and I'd ask indulgence to borrow 15 seconds.
Absolutely, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Brenner, I just want to understand, in 1994, when Mr. Beale began perpetrating this criminal activity of claiming to be CIA and taking time off, you had, prior to that time, co-owned this home that you call a vacation home in Massachusetts, having bought it from his parents. That's the way I understand it. Is that true?
That's true. That house was purchased by the two of us somewhere around 1983.
Okay. So at the time that you helped Mr. Beale get into this job, and through the period of part of your supervising him, you were friends, you co-owned a building, a home, a vacation spot together. That's correct, right?
It's correct that we co-owned. I don't describe that as helping Mr. Beale get into EPA. We have a personnel process, had a personnel process at the agency where his application
right. I don't want
needed to be
to take more of his time. It's just that when somebody says, "I sort of know this guy as a friend," but you co-own a building together, you're friends, you vacation together, and you're his supervisor. With that, I'll let the gentleman from Utah follow up.
Mr. Chairman, if I can ask unanimous consent to have my clock reset to 5, I believe Mr. Conley was given an extra.
The indulgence is so noted.
Thank you, and I thank the gentleman from Virginia as well for his understanding. And I thank the Chairman. Listen, this is important. If we're going to get to the truth, we have to understand, you know, as this nation, we are self-critical. We're going to look deep into these things to make sure they never happen again. So I've seen the movie Catch Me If You Can. It smells a lot like that. It's unbelievable that somebody could get away with this. I want to go back to that. I want to go back to that invitation and this party. There's a retirement party. Mr. Beale is stepping down. My understanding, Mr. Sullivan, is that Ms. McCarthy was at that retirement party, and she was keenly aware that he was retiring, correct?
Yes, sir. That's correct.
But he didn't actually retire. He continued on for how much longer on the payroll of the United States government?
A year and a half longer.
And that, at that time, he was the who was his direct report? He reported directly to Ms. McCarthy during that time, correct?
Yes.
Did he show up to work during that time?
No.
How, let's put up slide number 2, slide number 7, pardon me, slide number 7. This is a letter from Gina McCarthy, who is now the EPA administrator, but prior to that, she had this responsibility for Mr. Beale. The retirement party happened in September of 2011. This is an email that is dated January of 2013. As you are aware, we have been seeking confirmation for your employment status with the other Federal agency you maintained you have worked for or are currently working for while employed at the EPA. And later it goes on and says, we've been unable to confirm the existence of an interagency detail or any other type of arrangement. You're familiar with this email, Mr. Sullivan?
Yes, sir, I am.
Let's go to slide number 8. About a month later, this is an email, and the highlight I want to do, it has come to my attention that you are currently receiving a retention bonus in addition to your base salary. As a result, I have notified OARM to cancel payment of the retention bonus. So what happened there? In between, Gina McCarthy, she becomes aware that maybe this is a lie, it's fraud, it's deception, and she sends this.
Mr. Chavez, can you tell me the date of that email? I can't read it on the...
It is February 5th.
February 5th. And that was almost a week before we were informed about the situation. We were informed on February 11th of 2012. Excuse me, 2013.
So what did she do about it? Did she tell you about it?
She told us about it on February 11th of 2013.
She didn't tell you about it first, right? She told the General Counsel's office, who
That's correct, sir.
So she didn't tell you directly first. She told somebody else about it.
That's correct.
And then it went to another office, correct?
That's correct.
And then it finally landed on your desk.
That is correct.
Did she fire him?
Fire who, Mr. Beale?
Yeah.
No.
So Gina McCarthy knows that it's fraud. He's admitting that he doesn't have any excuse to this. He's basically been outed at this point. And the only thing that she does is get rid of his retention bonus?
Well, sir, with all due respect, I think you mischaracterized that. Ms. McCarthy forwarded her concerns about fraud, and it was our job as criminal investigators to investigate it. During this time period, from February 11th on, we were conducting our criminal investigation. So Ms. McCarthy had her suspicions.
But she had enough to go and say, let's get rid of your retention bonus, because obviously this other agency isn't true. What happened to Mr. Beale? Did he get fired?
No, sir. He retired.
And as a consequence, does he get his full retirement benefits?
Yes, sir, he does.
So here he's prosecuted, convicted, pled guilty, owing hundreds, almost $1 million. He defrauds the Federal government. Gina McCarthy knows about this. She only has 3 reports at the time. Mr. Brenner, who has his own ethical problems and challenges. Number 2 person is defrauding the Federal government by nearly $1 million, faking his way, saying he's a CIA employee, and she doesn't fire him? And the guy still, month after month, the United States taxpayers are going to pay him for his extraordinary services. And it's based, right, on the highest 3 years of his income, which was fraudulent. It's another example, Mr. Chairman, of this administration, the Obama administration, failing to actually fire somebody. What does it take to actually get fired in this Federal government? If this person couldn't be fired and she didn't do it, I think we have no choice but to hear from Administrator McCarthy. She was involved in this. She went to his retirement party. He didn't show up to work for years, and she paid him above what she's allowed to do by the statutory limit, didn't fire him. He still gets his bonus. She needs to come before this committee.
I thank the gentleman. As I go to Ms. Duckworth, I just want to make sure a timeline is accurate. According to what the gentleman just went through, the Administrator was aware and was working with the General Counsel on the fact that he didn't work for that other agency, in her estimation, before the investigation was given to you. Is that correct? In other words, General Counsel came, her awareness, General Counsel, and then later you. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay, we can follow up on that later. Thank you. The gentlelady from Illinois.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We're here to talk about government accountability today, and this is an incredibly important topic. But I would be remiss not to mention that our government is in shutdown for the first time in nearly 20 years. American veterans, small business owners, and families all across the country are waking up today to news that their government has failed to meet its most basic function. I've been willing to work with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to make changes to the Affordable Care Act. I even voted against my own party to repeal the Medical Device Act. But the time to have these discussions is not when government is being held hostage. This government shutdown is a disgrace. It's a waste of the American people's time. They are right to be extremely disappointed in us. Our neighbors sent us to Washington to find solutions and not to play politics. And I hope that my colleagues will remember that as we continue this discussion. That's why I am so pleased to be working in a bipartisan way at this hearing today. Like so many of my colleagues, I am outraged at this clear case of abuse in the public trust. At a time when programs critical to the livelihoods of Americans are being slashed, Mr. Beale managed to pocket hundreds of thousands of hardworking taxpayer dollars by making up fantasies and lies. And while this is just one particularly bad apple in an otherwise hardworking, honorable civil service workforce, it seems totally inexcusable to me that the management of this agency failed to catch and stop his fraudulent activity. For an entire decade after he was legitimately authorized to do so, Mr. Beale was able to receive thousands of dollars on autopilot. Mr. Elkins and Mrs. Sullivan, I understand that your office are still working on recommendations on how to address this massive management failures at the EPA. Could you share with us your thoughts on the controls that EPA has already started to put into place, and perhaps reflecting what my colleague from Utah was talking about in terms of once a manager finds out or suspects that there is something going on, are they allowed to fire that person right away, or must the investigation process continue, and how has that changed?
Well, first of all, I applaud the actions that EPA is taking to address some of the issues that we've discussed here at this hearing. We will continue to look, as a result of our audit, at what other internal control weaknesses are out there and make recommendations to resolve those internal control weaknesses as they make themselves apparent. In terms of the personnel issues or the regulations that you spoke of, I am not prepared to address specifically, what is allowed and what's not allowed for those, and I don't want to speculate without having, the actual regulations in front of me. I don't want to speculate on that issue.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Sullivan, do you think the controls that EPA has already started to put in place are sufficient?
Ma'am, I really don't want to offer an opinion on that. I haven't had a chance to see them being implemented, but I do want to say that we've received complete cooperation during this investigation. So I'm very hopeful, I'm optimistic, but I don't think we've had enough time to see if they're going to work.
Yeah. Mr. Brenner, this vacation home that you co-own in Massachusetts, when did you pay that off? Could you turn your microphone on, please?
Sure. We purchased the home in 1983 or somewhere around then, and then in later years, in the late 90s, Mr. Beale bought the remainder, my share of the house, from me because this was his family home that they had built together back when he was a teenager, and his plan was to redevelop the house.
Okay, let me.
He bought out my share.
I'm running out of time, so I'm just going to cut you off a little bit. So he bought out the time years after you authorized him to get additional pay that he wasn't authorized to get.
First of all,
25% of his salary more than he should have gotten.
I don't think that's accurate that he was not authorized to get it. That we went through a complete process for justifying that increase in pay.
Right, based on him
approved.
orally saying, oh yeah, I have an oral offer of a job offer. So basically you.
No, I think there was more than that. I remember.
That's not what I'm reading in the investigation here. It says that
remember-
there's no documentation that he ever had a job offer from another firm. Now, my question is, you helped him get additional money for years, and then he turned around and with that additional income, was able to pay you and buy you out of this home that you shared. Don't you think that's an ethical problem that you're facing right now?
Yeah. Actually, what happened at the time was he sold a residence that he had here in the area, and he used the proceeds from that in order to be able to.
And how did he buy
pay
that
off the house.
residence? With additional dollars, with the pay that he received, a job that you helped him get, and a job that you helped him get more money than he should have been getting for all this time. Mr. Persepsi, with my last question, I just want to ask, even if an EPA employee has a buddy like Mr. Brenner to help him out, who himself is willing to engage in questionable ethics by accepting handouts from lobbyists, can this continue to happen with the EPA today?
Today, there's no one at EPA getting these retention bonuses. Only 28 people have gotten it in the last 20 years. We have put new processes in place, and I agree with the Inspector General that I need to see more of their work to know if I need to do more. But we have not waited, and we've put some new controls in place. It's basically layers of controls that would kick out, these things when they're not being. The problem with the Beale activity through the first decade of this century was that it was never kicked out that his retention bonus had expired, and it should have been, and it can't go that way anymore because we now have a hard stop in the system that would pop it out, and it would either have to be recertified with the evidence that you suggested, Congresswoman, or the payments would stop. So that's what would happen today if somebody else got a retention bonus.
Thank you. I'm over my time, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the gentlelady. The Chair will now recognize the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Micah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, Mr. Elkins, I've heard that you've said to the committee that you think measures have been put in place that so this could not happen again. Is that correct?
Mr. Micah, actually, Mr. Perciasepi made that statement.
Well, do you agree with what he said? Based on your investigation, what took place?
Well, at this stage of the game, since we have not completed our audit, I can't really speculate whether or not that was.
So we don't know. But this is an incredible tale of ripping off the government for 2 decades, and it's also astounding. And I wasn't here; I had to run to the floor, but to find out that this individual is going to get his retirement. Is that the case again, Mr. Giuseppe?
I can only say at this time, Congressman, we're looking into that. I mean, obviously, we had to wait for the investigation to be completed. Obviously, it was it was put before the judge on Friday. So we are going to look into all avenues to collect money that might be due to the federal government.
Mm-hmm. Well, let me ask you a further question. How would you describe the relationship between Mr. Beale and Ms. McCarthy?
I think Administrator McCarthy was suspicious of all of these activities, and I recognize that we can parse through how many months here or how many months there, but the bottom line is she was the first person since 2001 that actually questioned these activities, and which led ultimately to the Inspector General's report. Trying to check out somebody's personnel status it doesn't necessarily require the IG as a first step, but I recognize that we need to make sure that we're following up with the IG on these matters. So we did do that, and the investigation has been completed, and we now see what we see here. But I want to point out, she is the one that precipitated that, whether how many months one way or the other.
Let me ask Mr. Sullivan a question. And can we put the slide up? I think it's slide 8. It's an email from McCarthy in February of 2013, a month after her last email questioning Mr. Beale's work status. This email is about the fact that she is now cutting off his retention bonus. Mr. Sullivan, for how long had Mr. Beale been receiving these bonuses?
He'd been receiving them continuously since 1991.
It seems strange and ironic that someone who had stated they retired is receiving a bonus, which was, in fact, the bonuses I thought were designed to keep people from leaving the agency. Even if the facts of Mr. Beale's situation were true, would his covert activities warrant a retention bonus?
I don't want to offer an opinion on that, sir. I don't know. All I can tell you is that he continued receiving them up until 2013.
Well, again, it's incredible of all these this time that passes, gaming the system, then at the very end, continuing to game it to receive a bonus designed to keep people from the agency, and he was set to leave. That is just beyond the pale. Mr. Elkins, would you like to comment?
Sir, clearly there were some internal controls that were not functioning properly, and to that extent, that would be the extent of my comment.
Well, again, when we're facing, well, today's the government shutdown, but we are facing financial bankruptcy of the nation in a couple of weeks, with our debt have exploded from the beginning of this administration from $9 billion to $9 trillion to $17 trillion, and soon asking for nearly another $1 trillion to keep us afloat. And people see this kind of money going out to someone who scammed the system. It's greatly disappointing, disheartening, and very sad for the American taxpayer. I yield back, Mr. Chair.
Thank the gentleman from Florida. The Chair will now recognize the gentlelady from New York, Ms. Maloney.
Thank you, and I thank the Chairman and Ranking Member for calling this hearing. It's unbelievable. It's outrageous. It reminds me of the famous movie on fraud, Catch Me If You Can, who defrauded so many people. But this is a case you're defrauding the United States taxpayers, eroding their faith in government. It is outrageous beyond belief. And Mr. Principe, I want to know, how much does he get in retirement? And what are you going to do to make sure he doesn't get the retirement money? That's the first step that we can take in retrieving what by his own admission, Mr. Beale said that he received over $800,000 in pay, bonuses, travel, benefits, and a total scam that defrauded the government for well over a decade. So do you know how much he makes in retirement? And what are you doing to make sure that the scam doesn't continue, that a complete fraud who said he was a member of the distinguished CIA and no one even bothered to check? It's almost the incompetence is beyond belief. So do you know what his retirement is each year?
Congresswoman, I do not know what his...
Can you get it back to the committee?
We can definitely get it back.
And can you get us the steps you're taking to make sure he does not get his retirement? And if you say you cannot get it, we can't stop it because of bureaucratic regulations, then I believe in a bipartisan effort we would join in a single bill to stop it and to stop anyone else who defrauds the taxpayer of getting a retirement benefit. It's beyond belief. He scams the taxpayer, scams the agency, scams the government, and erodes the confidence we have in government, and then gets a retirement. I for one, hope that we can stop that at the very least. Now, these retention benefits that my colleague was talking about, Who recommended him to get these retention benefits? Do you know, Mr. Sullivan, who recommended him?
Yes, ma'am. In 1991, Mr. Brenner prepared the paperwork for the first set of retention bonuses, and it was approved by a gentleman by the name of William Rosenberg, who was the then Assistant Administrator for the Office of Air and Radiation. The second round of retention bonuses were prepared in 2000. And again, Mr. Brenner recommended them, and it was signed by Mr. Perciasepe, who at the time was the then Assistant Administrator for the Office of Air and Radiation.
So Mr. Brenner, the gentleman with whom he sells his house to the guy he's recommending to get an illegal bonus, and then has other business relationships, he's recommending that he gets this bonus treatment. Now, Mr. Brenner, did you think that he had another job offer?
Yes, this was in 1991 when the original.
Did you get it in writing? Did you get a copy in writing? Was in the file any information about the job offer that entitled him to this additional pay and scam?
I don't remember whether we had it in writing or whether we had obtained the information through a phone call, but he did have an offer, and I would note that this.
There is no offer unless it's put into the file. And Mr. Sullivan, will you research this and get back to us? Was there anything in the file in writing about this alleged job offer that Mr. Brenner's pal got, who then he sold his house to or did other business deals with? Was there anything in writing in the file?
I can answer that question now, Congresswoman. Mr. Beale told us that he never had a written offer either in 1991 or 2000. So there was never a written offer for any of the retention incentive bonuses.
So we have policies in place, but they're not implemented. We need an audit of what's happening. Who would be the proper person to audit this so that the Mr. Brenners of the future can't get away with it? Mr. Brenner, did you recommend other people to get this special treatment?
I don't remember having.
Okay, Mr. Sullivan, would you investigate who else he recommended should get this and whether or not he had business deals with them? I mean, this is just unbelievable. And who would be the proper person, Mr. Perciasepe, to audit this to make sure that people within the agency are honest?
Well, first of all, we put some new controls in already on the retention bonus system. No one at EPA right now is getting a retention bonus. Even the Inspector General themselves have used this technique to keep valuable employees. And so we don't want to.
I'm not questioning the policy. I'm just saying the policy, you know, we need professionals and we need highly qualified people to get many offers. But I believe that Mr. Beale never had another offer. I believe that he lied, like he lied to everyone else. So how do we catch the liars? Who would you say would be the appropriate agency to audit the EPA to see if anyone else is involved in some type of scam and whether this is following? Now, I would just like to say, how many other people do you think are scamming the EPA right now with your lax policies that are in place?
Well, first of all, I believe we have adequate policies in place at EPA.
Well, they're obviously not working to the tune of $800,000. And it would have continued without the excellent work of Gina McCarthy and I would say the investigators and the prosecutors who stopped this. I congratulate their public work, but that this was allowed to happen for well over a decade is an outrageous abuse.
There are two things here. There's a policy, and then whether the policy is followed and if there are controls to make sure the policy.
Okay, obviously there weren't controls. What do you recommend would be the controls? The policies were in place.
Correct.
You required written information. The written information was not there.
These things should only last for 3 years. They should be recertified.
You know, they have to be killed with a date for 3 years. So the policies were abused. My question is, how do you enforce the policies that are in place? There should be an audit of this. Where should the audit come from?
I'm going to say, first, I've done some changes already. Second,
excuse me, the gentlelady's time has expired, but you may answer her question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We've made some changes already based on what we know in terms of controls to make sure the policies are implemented. I am confident that the Inspector General, who we have a very good working relationship with, is also looking at this to see if there will be more to do. I'm not going to presuppose that what we've already done is enough, but I want you to be comfortable that we've already made changes that will that have more controls on there.
Mr. Chairman, I still haven't had the answer to my question. He says
The
they
IG.
put more.
The IG.
The IG is investigating. What I was asking about, who audits before it even gets to the IG? Who audits to make sure they're doing what they're supposed to do? That was my question. Is there an audit there? The IG is going after corruption. I'm talking about a level where you make sure that the policies that are put in place actually happen, an audit level. Where would that be? Can anybody answer that where they think it should be?
Yeah, I will try to answer that. I believe what you're referring to are the internal controls. And I think at the program and operational level, once those internal controls are in place, that the folks who are in charge of implementing those policies and programs should be the ones to audit those to make sure that they are being implemented correctly.
Can we ask, in this case, would it have been Mr. Brenner who would have audited, since he's the one who approved it? Who would have audited in the case of Mr. Beale? If you had a proper audit, who would be the person in EPA who should have audited whether or not all his claims were true and all of the stuff that he was doing, ripping off everybody? Who would have been the proper person to audit it?
You may answer it briefly.
Well, typically speaking, it would probably be a supervisor.
And his supervisor was Mr. Brenner, right? So, I mean,
The gentlewoman who dealt, I believe it was Gina McCarthy.
supervisor was Gina McCarthy, but
Yes.
so she should be auditing it for the whole area.
She had three, gentlewoman, I appreciate the time. She only had 3 direct reports, Mr. Brenner, Mr. Beale, and another person.
Could I have the opportunity to clarify this?
Well, the gentlelady, her time has expired. I've been very generous, but you and I will have a chance to talk briefly, and you may have an opportunity to answer it in response to one of my questions. But for now, we'll go to the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Walberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the panel that's here that has helped to get to the bottom of some of these issues that we're questioning. Mr. Sullivan, were you ever aware that Mr. Beale was in Pakistan?
He had significant foreign travel, and we know he took a trip to India, and I'm not sure if we ever confirmed a trip to Pakistan, but many times when he claimed to be in Pakistan, through phone records, we proved he was in the United States.
Could we get the slide up, 4B, on that? 4B. I wanted to ask that question and see if you had any direct information. 4B. There you go. Okay. You notice it says there, this was a email from John Beale to Gina McCarthy. Due to recent events that you have probably read about, I am in Pakistan.
Well, we could definitely say, Congressman, that he was not in Pakistan then, because we checked his cell phone usage, and the cell towers he was pinging off of were either in Massachusetts or in Arlington, Virginia.
So when he said I'm reachable by cell, text, or email with a 9-hour time difference, ho, ho, ho.
That was obviously a lie.
That was obviously a lie. Thank you. Mr. Perciasepi, when was the first time that Ms. McCarthy expressed to you that she had concerns about Mr. Beale?
We had conversations probably in 2012 during our regular meetings where she was expressing these concerns, and everybody in the agency at the management level said that they should be pursued, and which is what she did.
Did you ever discuss with Ms. McCarthy her decision to refer the matter to the General Counsel rather than the IG?
No, I never did, but I don't think that it's...
Did you ever discuss with Ms. McCarthy the General Counsel's decision to have the Office of Homeland Security look into the matter rather than refer it to the IG?
Will you let me answer?
Well, I think you did. I asked you if you ever had, and you said no. So what about this?
The idea that you pursue what may be a personnel, an HR matter through the General Counsel, or there may be something related to the other agency that has been mentioned several times here. The lead unit in our agency that deals with the intelligence community on a general level is the Office of Homeland Security. But once that was discovered that was not, there was nothing to verify there, then we immediately turned it over to the IG.
Well,
So we're talking about, we're talking about a couple of months here when this, has obviously something that Ms. McCarthy.
then to your knowledge, was the decision to direct the matter to the Office of Homeland Security, which is located in the Office of the Administrator, done to contain the issue to within the agency and keep the story from becoming news that it could affect the agency?
Absolutely not. I mean, it was to determine facts, and once we had the facts, we turned it over to the IG.
To your knowledge, was the decision to direct the matter to the Office of Homeland Security, which is located in the Office of Administrator, done so that EPA could understand the facts of the story prior to it becoming news?
Once we understood the facts, we turned them over to the IG to let it go where it went. And I can guarantee you that the IG will attest that we cooperated completely. We wanted them to get to the bottom of it.
Mr. Sullivan, Mr. Elkins?
Well, yes, sir. Ms. Percisepi is correct that it was referred to the Office of Homeland Security first via the Office of General Counsel. The only problem that we had with that is the Office of Homeland Security, who are not criminal investigators, without law enforcement authority, they interviewed Mr. Beale very prematurely in our estimation, and it caused us great harm to the investigation.
The Head Start caused you harm?
That's correct, sir.
Mr. Percisepi, you worked with Mr. Beale both in the 1990s and from 2009 on. Is that correct?
I was the Assistant Administrator for Air and Radiation for 2.5 years in the late 1990s, correct.
When was the first time Mr. Beale represented to you that he was doing work for the CIA?
He never represented that to me.
Never at all?
Never.
Did you ever have any doubts about this claim when it came evident?
I had lots of doubts about it when it became evident to me when I came back to the agency.
What did you do to seek to verify the claim?
It was already on. Assistant Administrator McCarthy at the time was in the process of running it through what we just talked about.
You oversaw the office in which Mr. Beale worked and later became the Deputy Administrator. Don't you think it was your responsibility to verify one of your employees was missing work under the guise of being a covert operative for the CIA?
He was not doing that when he worked for me.
Mr. Chairman, it's amazing. As we're talking today of a government shutdown, I think we have evidences here of government shutdown in the EPA over issues that cost the taxpayer almost $1 million. And I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. The Chair will now recognize the gentlelady from California, Ms. Spear.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, and I thank the ranking member, and I thank the Inspector Generals for being here. This is an absolute disgrace. This is stealing money from the American people. It reminds me of a perfect burglary and is ripe for a made-for-TV movie. Now, having said that, I am deeply concerned about a number of things. One, prospectively trying to take someone's retirement away, as the bill that's being suggested by the Chairman and being discussed with the ranking member is something that I would endorse. But I would recommend that what we need to do here is introduce a private bill to take away the pension of Mr. Beale, because this bill that we're contemplating is only going to be prospective in nature. And I think this man has got to be brought to real justice. I'm concerned about, one, he is in debt to the American people, having ripped them off about $800,000. Do we even know if he has assets that equal $800,000? Do we know that?
Yes, ma'am, he does. He had significant assets. In fact, he's already paid back to the clerk of the court here in the District of Columbia $886,000, and he has 90 days to pay the $507,000 asset forfeiture judgment against him.
How much money have you spent in this investigation?
We can get back to you on that, ma'am. I don't have that in front of me.
Because I think the other thing that we should look at is the cost recovery that should be attributed to the individual who has conducted themselves in such an illegal manner. The taxpayer shouldn't have to pick up the tab for that. We should be able to recover that cost as well, and that should be contemplated in any legislation that we do as well. Mr. Brenner, do you think you've done anything wrong?
No, I do not think I have done anything wrong with respect to the way Mr. Beale's personnel issues were handled during the time I was his supervisor.
Well, let's start by the fact that you recommended him for a retention bonus, which you did, correct?
That's correct.
And it's required that you have a written offer to base that retention bonus on, correct?
I don't know whether a written offer is required. It requires that there either be a written offer or a determination that an offer was made. In other words, I believe at times it's done through a phone call to discuss it with whoever was making the offer.
Is that true, Mr. Sullivan? Is it required that there be a written offer?
It's my understanding that a written offer is not required, although most packages do have a written offer attached. What is required, the supervisor recommending the incentive bonus has to assert that he or she did due diligence to confirm there was an offer.
All right. So what was your due diligence, Mr. Brenner?
So we're talking about something that happened 20-some years ago, and
you can't recall, it sounds like.
I don't recall whether there was a letter or whether there was a phone call, but I know that it was reviewed by the personnel office. All of these retention allowances
No, but
need to be reviewed.
You had an obligation to do due diligence. Did you talk to this prospective employer? You have to be able to recall that.
It's 20-some years ago, so I don't remember whether I either talked to the employer or had received a letter, but I know that without one of those two things being in place, there was no way it could have been approved.
Well, let me ask you about the $8,000 discount you received. Did you disclose that on your financial disclosure statement?
I did.
You did. Is that an amount that is legal to actually receive?
It's on my
Isn't it a gift?
2011 disclosure statement, and as I said—
Was that after the fact? Was that after it was reported?
That was when it was reviewed. It was
okay. So,
and as I said, it was reviewed and investigated by the Department of Justice, and the decision was to decline taking
well,
any
whether they
additional action on
declined
it.
to take legal action or not does not mean that it wasn't illegal. If you received an $8,000 discount, that is a gift that exceeds the limits under the financial disclosure laws. And I think you are guilty. And I do think that you should be held accountable for the fact that you received a gift that exceeded the amount that you are allowed to receive under those laws. Mr. Sullivan, the fact that Mr. Beale took 3 trips to London at $25,000 apiece, one to London and India for $36,000, and made it his goal in life to only fly first class, and was able to get a chiropractor to basically say he had a back problem and therefore should be able to fly first class, is deeply troubling to me. I think I could go to a chiropractor and get a letter saying that I have a back problem. Lots of people up here could probably do that. That's not a basis on which you fly first class internationally or anywhere. So what do we do to fix that?
As Mr. Elkins had previously testified, there are an ongoing series of 7 audits within EPA, and one of them specifically, the audits that are ongoing, that not in my shop, that's the Office of Audit, was looking at the first-class travel in EPA, and I know that will be part of the comprehensive report that will be produced.
You know, Mr. Sullivan, and I know I've exceeded my time. Mr. Chairman, let me just make one more comment. What you have uncovered troubles all of us greatly. I worry that there could be incidents like this in other agencies within the Federal Government. And I hope that what you have uncovered is shared with other IGs throughout the system, and that we clean up this act everywhere. Because I wouldn't be surprised if we have first-class travel going on in other agencies under the ruse that everyone has a back problem, and I yield back.
Chair thanks the gentlelady. The Chair will now recognize the gentleman from Oklahoma, Mr. Langford.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I completely associate myself with the comments that the gentlelady just made, Mr. Spear. This is something we do need to establish a process. There are employees that have been furloughed through sequestration. At the same time, we've got an employee that's getting a $250,000 salary, well in excess of what's legally accessible, and doing 0 work at the EPA. 0. Not even showing up. That is frustrating for the people that are working there and that are doing their job. That's frustrating for other people in the Federal family, and it's incredibly frustrating to the Federal taxpayer, who works very hard and who counts pennies and who is very attentive to their own family and what they turn in on their IRS forms that goes into the working of the Federal Government. They want to know it actually works, and someone's watching how this is being spent. So I do appreciate the work. We have a lot of work still to go to be able to evaluate some of these processes, but I'd like to talk about a couple of these processes as well, to pick up what Mrs. Spear was mentioning before. What is the paperwork that is required to turn in and say, I have a back problem, I have to get first-class tickets everywhere that I fly? What's required for that?
In this case, our investigation revealed that Mr. Beale presented a chiropractor note, and it was submitted to the travel office at EPA, and he was flagged then as being authorized for first-class travel.
Okay, so was that because he was an executive or because he's just traveling, period?
Because he was traveling. It's my understanding that whether you're an executive or not, if you submit a legitimate doctor's note and your supervisor approves it, you will be eligible for first-class travel.
Okay, so same thing dealing with getting a closer parking spot. He can walk in and say, I'm a Vietnam vet and I had malaria and so I need a closer parking spot. Was there documentation that was required for that?
There is documentation that's required, but it's our understanding that it was just his assertion. There was that no one from EPA asked him for a doctor's note to confirm his malaria.
Okay, he walks in one day and says, I work for the CIA. I need a day off a week. What documentation is required for that?
Normally, there has to be an interagency agreement, and EPA would go to the other agency and sign a memorandum of understanding for the repayment. Currently, though, since 2008, there's a requirement now that if the CIA does recruit an employee from another agency, the director of the CIA is required to inform the head of that agency as well as the general counsel. But that's in effect only from 2008 on.
So no, everyone was grandfathered in that was already in, so it was just additional new hires at that point? So they wouldn't have been evaluated by EPA looking for this documentation, or that's everybody?
Well, it's my understanding from henceforth from 2008 on, but I don't know if anyone went back to look at Mr. Beale's case. In fact, I could tell you no one did. To our knowledge, no one went back and confirmed.
So when the rule was changed in 2008, no one went back and confirmed it and said, hey, we need to get all this paperwork cleaned up. We've got a gap in your file.
That's correct.
To be able to get all that done. Mr. Perciasepe, how many staff does the EPA have that work full-time for the EPA and also get paid by another agency?
I don't know the answer to that. I mean, we do have interagency agreements. We even have EPA employees working here in Congress, but we can certainly get that for the record.
No, I'm not talking about they also do that, but they're getting paid. I'm assuming that Mr. Beale was claiming that he was not just being paid by the EPA, but he was also employed by the CIA being paid over there.
I do not know what he claimed. I don't know what he claimed because I haven't seen the full investigative report yet.
So the question is there anyone that is paid by the EPA that then is assigned to another location that's also paid by them, that is paid by two different agencies at the same time? So I understand you're saying some EPA folks are assigned to Congress.
Yes, and we pay those salaries. And it's usually one or the other is paying. I mean, somebody could go on an agreement like Mr. Sullivan's saying, or an interagency agreement of some kind, and how the pay is distributed is often part of that discussion. But we certainly can get you information about how many are doing that. But there's several kinds of agreements and how that goes, and it could go either way on how the pay is done.
Okay, Mr. Sullivan, do we know of any employees that are with the EPA that are also being paid by another agency at the same time? They're actually working for two agencies simultaneous.
Well, for example, we have an agent detailed to the Federal Enforcement Training Center. We have an agreement. They reimburse us for that person's salary, but the employee would not receive both salaries at the same time.
Okay.
That would be illegal.
That's what I'm getting at. I think it might be a little odd that the CIA was actually covertly having the EPA pay the salary of one of their secret agents to send them out there. I don't know whether we have a lot of EPA folks that are currently on the CIA task force. But again, the whole thing smells weird from the very beginning to try to figure out where that works. The other problem that I see in this is this constant statement over and over again that he was an executive, and so when he turned in travel vouchers, they weren't challenged.
That is absolutely correct. That's the person who signed his travel vouchers told us point blank she never reviewed the vouchers, never looked at the receipts. She accepted as fact whatever Mr. Beale put in because he was an executive and because he worked for the CIA.
Okay, so it begs the issue of who's supervising the supervisors at this point. And obviously that's the task of the IG that we ask you to be able to do, to be able to step in. In this case, the agency went around you to try to investigate it and have you last in line to be able to look at it rather than first in line. But we have a real breakdown of process here when supervisors just turn in stuff. All the people that work under them don't feel like they can actually respond back to it and challenge what's happening, and they just sign off and expenses continue to fly. So this is not the end of this conversation, because we do want to follow back up on the many issues of fraud that's here and how systemic this really is, and we hope we find nothing. But my fear is there will be several more that we find in the process, probably with not stories as well written as this story, but other issues that are out there. With that, I yield back.
Chair thanks the gentleman from Oklahoma. Now recognizes the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Meadows.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Perciasepe, I'm intrigued by your testimony, because you said earlier that Mr. Beale never represented to you that he worked for the CIA. So is that, to follow up, that you never heard of him working for the CIA? Because there's a difference.
Right. When this unfolded,
before it unfolded, had you ever heard of that?
No.
So no one ever shared what he was doing.
You know, I didn't see Mr. Beale for 13 years. I don't know what went on from 2001 or 2000 till I came back to the agency.
But from 2009 on, he worked with you. Well, maybe not, because he wasn't really there. He was covertly in Pakistan.
I don't know.
You don't know.
That's what we're.
Okay.
That's what we've turned this over to the IG for.
So tell me how the retention bonuses are supposed to work. How do they work?
The basic premise is you have a person who is likely to leave because they have either a job offer or some other important financial reason, and that they are critical to some of the work that they're doing, and then there's a process we go through where that is laid out. There are recommendations made. It has.
So you've been involved in those processes, and you're the one, huh?
Only once, and I don't know if you were here when I mentioned earlier. There's currently no one at EPA that.
So how long are they supposed to last?
They're supposed to last 3 years. That's the policy, and they're supposed to be recertified every year.
All right. So, Mr. Sullivan, so to your knowledge, how long did Mr. Beale actually receive his retention bonus?
The first series of incentive bonuses went from 1991 to 1999. They should have stopped after 3 years. They did not. Then he was put in for a second round of incentive bonuses in 2000, and that was the same year he got promoted to the senior leader position. And so during the course of his career, he received bonuses for 22 years, and he should not have received them more than 6.
Okay, so Mr. Perciasepe, at the year 2000, he shouldn't have been receiving a retention bonus.
He should have had it recertified in 2001, 2002, and 2003.
He just said 99. He just said 99.
No, he said it was redone in 2000, which I think would be 3 more years, if I'm not correct.
All right, so 2000 was the start of 3 years, and you signed off on that, is that correct?
Yes, I did.
Okay, so what did you go through to sign off on it? Check with the CIA?
No, he did, as I've already mentioned, he did not use that line with me. And in the 1990s, and this is hard to believe.
13 years ago, I know.
Yeah,
but
painful for me to go through this, but this was a person who had a reputation, a positive reputation in the Federal Government, both inside EPA and outside EPA in that time period. It is not outside the realm of possibility to me as the Assistant Administrator that this person could be getting offers from other other entities.
But I thought we had a guideline that says it stops at 3 years.
Right. Well,
So you
I
just
had
have
no
to have a
knowledge-
good reputation to be able to exceed the guideline.
Right. I had no knowledge of any previous one at this particular moment I'm talking about in the year
So how
2000.
did you approve one without having previous knowledge? So that just says when it comes to your desk, if they've got a good reputation, you sign off on it?
Well, it's not just a good reputation. There has to be a case laid out by the career leaders in the agency, which was done in this case, and then it goes
Wouldn't that case have previous retention bonuses that would have been paid?
They were not included. I don't recall them being
Really?
included. So when Mr. Sullivan says there were 6 years that out of the number of years, one was based on the original one and one was based on the one that I did, those are legitimate years that he could have gotten a retention bonus under the rules of the agency. The problem we have is there was nothing that stopped it. It just kept going, and that's what I've changed. I've changed the system so there's a hard stop.
So there's a hard stop, all right? Let me go over, I guess, to Mr. Brenner, because didn't you sign off on it as well? And you were his friend, so you knew he was in the CIA, and you were signing off on a retention bonus, I guess, to keep him working at the CIA? Because you were very close. You have an intimate relationship with him. Is that not true?
I am a close friend of Mr. Beale's, but I had never heard from Mr. Beale that he worked for the CIA.
But you knew he
or
wasn't
National
showing up for
Security.
work. You knew he was somewhere other than being at work.
No, the period we're talking about is the 1991 and the 2000.
Now, that's not the period. I'm talking in general. I'm not just saying that one period. You knew that there was something that he wasn't showing up and he was still getting retention bonuses because you had to sign off on them. In 2000, I've got your signature right here.
And in 2000, I believe he was showing up. I certainly was not aware of any problem with Mr. Beale's attendance in the year 2000 or in the decade prior to that.
Okay, I appreciate the Chair's indulgence. Let me finish with this question then. Both of you, Mr. Perciasepe and Mr. Brenner, both of you knew that he retired. You knew that. And yet we still continued to give him retention bonuses to retain him to make sure that he wouldn't retire a second time? How can you, either one of you, explain that and justify that?
Well, first of all, he did have a retirement party, but based on what I now know, he never, to my knowledge, never submitted the retirement papers.
I understand,
so
but in your mind, you went to the retirement party, I think, didn't you?
Yes.
So how could you justify going to his retirement party and then making him getting a retention bonus to make sure that he stayed retired? I mean, what is it?
This is the change that I've made in the system.
I'm not asking about the change. I mean, how could you have not seen that?
I don't see his paycheck. I don't see his timesheet.
But you had to sign off on it, on the retention bonus.
In 13 years before.
I understand 13, but so you don't manage it?
It would have been my assumption that it had expired, 10 years earlier.
So you manage by assumption?
Well, there's 17,000 employees. I'm not looking at their paychecks.
All right. I yield back. Thank you for the indulgence, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the gentleman. Have we completed the first round? Okay, we'll now go to the gentleman from South Carolina. I think he's the last
Mr. Chairman, point of inquiry just for a moment. I just wanted to indicate to the Chair that I was hopeful that we would have a second round. I'd like an opportunity to.
We will have a short second round. It's the Chair's intention to get out of here as close to 12:30 as possible. Mr. Perciasepe, you had originally wanted to leave at 12:30, but we said it might take a little longer. Well, we'll get you out close to it.
Mr. Chairman, I'm at your disposal.
Okay, then.
Thanks, Mr.
Moving along, the last questions on the first round, the gentleman from South Carolina.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just initially, I wanted to make the observation, Mr. Chairman, according to the pre-sentence report, Mr. Beale is looking at between 30 and 37 months in federal prison for about a $900,000 loss. You get more time in prison for that. for stealing a six-pack of beer if you threaten that you have a weapon which you really don't have. You get more time in prison for that for a very small amount of certain controlled substances. Even though he refused to answer our questions, Mr. Sullivan, did you interview Mr. Beale?
My staff did, sir.
Did you advise him of his Fifth Amendment right?
At the time of the interview with him, it was with counsel, it was in the U.S. Attorney's Office of proffer, and that was not necessary. It was per written agreement, he would cooperate with us.
All right, so you had an agreement with him that he would cooperate. Did that agreement also include that he would cooperate with other entities that were investigating wrongdoing?
At the time, the agreement was the proffer meeting, and it was up to the U.S. Attorney whether he would accept it or not. So it was a limited agreement.
He's getting a 3-level reduction in his guideline range for cooperation. That's super acceptance of responsibility. And yet this morning, he wouldn't answer a single one of Chairman Iss's questions. So I guess my question is anyone going to go before the district court judge and make sure he or she knows that Mr. Beale wouldn't even answer this branch of government's questions? He answered I mean, you can't plead guilty without waiving your Fifth Amendment privilege. So he waived it for the judge, and he waived it for the executive branch when you wanted to talk to him or when the U.S. Attorney wanted to talk to him, but he wouldn't waive it for Darrell Issa when he wanted to talk to him. Well, can I rest assured that the sentencing judge will be made aware of that?
Well, what we will do, Mr. Gowdy, is we will brief the U.S. Attorney, AUSA, on the case, and we'll bring your concerns forward to the U.S. Attorney assigned to the case.
Yeah, I just find it stunning that you would want to avail yourself of the maximum departure from the guidelines that you can get for acceptance of responsibility and still sit here and not answer a single solitary question from a co-equal branch of government. Ms. Maloney asked a question that I thought was an extremely good question. Actually, she asked a bunch of really good questions, but I never heard an answer to this one. Is there a policy or procedure in place to investigate conflicts of interest between those who approve bonuses and those who receive bonuses? Not all at once.
The only requirement I know of, Congressman, is a financial disclosure requirement of all the senior officials.
So in theory, Mr. Brenner could be approving financial bonuses or other financial incentives for someone that he has a financial stake in whether or not they get more money. Is that within the realm of the possible? Because it certainly sounds like that's what went on.
Well, I'm not going to speculate on what's possible, but...
Why not?
Because I'm going to wait to read what the IG investigative report...
Well, if you're not going to speculate on what's possible, my next question is this. If Mr. Chaffetz or Jimmy Jordan told Chairman Issa that they weren't going to be here for a couple of weeks because they were CIA operatives, how would Mr. Issa go about verifying whether or not, and I'm going to be very clear, to date, neither Mr. Chaffetz nor Mr. Jordan have alleged that they're CIA operatives, but if that were to happen, how would Mr. Issa go about investigating whether or not that was true?
I can't answer that.
Well, the next person who claims it at your agency, how will you go about investigating whether it's true?
Under the current rules, as Mr. Sullivan pointed out, if there's an interagency relationship with that agency, the general counsel and the head of the agency would know.
So, what, a phone call?
I don't know what the process
is. That what we're talking about, Mr. Sullivan? A phone call to verify whether or not someone really is a secret agent with the CIA?
Well, I testified earlier, sir, that in 2008, a new directive came out, I think it's Intelligence Directive 304, which requires the Director of National Intelligence to inform the head of an agency and the agency's general counsel if one of their employees is working undercover for the CIA.
Mr. Sullivan, I appreciate that. And it really doesn't matter whether you're a new Earth guy or an old Earth guy, but 2008 just seems a little late to be figuring out that with one phone call you can decide whether or not someone who's claiming to be a spy and traveling first class and racking up $900,000 in unwarranted compensation really does work for another agency. I mean, look, I understand technology has progressed a lot. 2008 just seems a little late for us to figure that out. There was nothing in place prior to that?
Well, sir, clearly the officials at the time, going back to the 90s through the 2000s, could have checked his story. No one did. It took us in the IG about a week, using our contacts at the CIA, to positively confirm he had absolutely no relationship with the CIA. We were able to determine early on he's never had a security clearance. So right now, I mean, and when he was an employee, he was not allowed to see classified material because there was no security clearance on file with the EPA Office of Security.
I thank the gentleman. I just want to hear one more time. Since 2008, the head of each agency is given a list of anyone who is a clandestine agent working under their cover.
That's my understanding, Mr. Chairman, from Intelligence Directive 304. It's on the Internet, and it pretty much explains that the requirement of the Director of National Intelligence and the CIA to inform executive branch agencies.
So Secretary Clinton would know everyone at the State Department, and her deputy would know everyone who was CIA implant. The EPA directors, each of them, or administrators, each would have been given this information. So if the administrator had even one person who was embedded, they would know that. We don't need to know if they have one, but if any agency had an embedded CIA person, they would have, in fact, had a list, and he would not have been on it since 2008.
That's right. That's my understanding, Mr. Chairman.
Well, I share with the gentleman from South Carolina his outrage, but 2008 was a long time ago, too. I seem to remember George W. Bush was president then.
I defer to the Chairman's recollection.
With that, we go to the gentleman from Maryland.
Mr. Elkins, I understand that Mr. Beale's fraud was initially uncovered by the EPA current administrator, Gina McCarthy, back when she was Assistant Administrator of the Office of Air and Radiation. Is that right? Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
I'm talking to you. I understand that the Administrator McCarthy started asking questions about Mr. Beale's employment status after she discovered that Mr. Beale was still being paid many months after she had attended his retirement party. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Sullivan, I understand that your investigators interviewed the administrator. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
And the time that the Administrator McCarthy started asking questions about Mr. Beale's status, can you tell us whether she believed that Mr. Beale was a CIA agent, and why did she think that was the case, if she thought that was the case?
Yes, she most definitely thought Mr. Beale worked for the CIA. When she was confirmed by the Senate and had her in-briefing in 2009, she was told she had a member of her staff who was on the CIA, and that was Mr. Beale. And indeed, when she met Mr. Beale, he told her he worked for the CIA.
So who would have told her that?
It was during her in-briefing process. She couldn't recall exactly who told her, but she remembered distinctly being told that during the in-briefing process.
And so if it would not be unusual for somebody coming in to be confirmed in a position comparable to hers to be told that you got somebody here that's with the CIA or any other agency?
Yes, sir. I mean, she assumed that was part of the regular process. That's what she was briefed on.
Now, the Inspector General has criticized the EPA for not referring Mr. Beale to him earlier. Mr. Perciasepe, can you tell us why there was a delay in the referral to the Inspector General? What was the EPA doing during that period, and why did it take so long? Because I think this is kind of crucial, because I'm seeing where some of the questioning is going, and I think they're fair questions. And if you have an answer, I want to know the answer.
Well, I can give you an explanation. When Assistant Administrator McCarthy, who I want to point out once again, no one ever questioned this for over a decade, questioned this. The first thing she wanted to do and the first thing she wanted to see was whether or not this person had any of these relationships that are being discussed. So she asked the General Counsel and the Office of Resource Management, where our personnel folks are. They asked the Office of Homeland Security, who has relationships with the intelligence community. And when nothing could be found there, I think it was quickly and confirmed then quickly, as Mr. Sullivan just mentioned, it was quickly referred to the Inspector General. You know, that is what happened. Those are facts. That is what happened. There was absolutely no attempt to go around the IG at all. It was only an attempt to verify the story. And once it was not verifiable, then it became a matter that it needed to be investigated.
Now, Mr. Sullivan, I know that the Inspector General's office has criticized the EPA for referring Mr. Beale's case to the IG's office no sooner. We fully support the IG's efforts, so I want to give you a chance to explain more detail why this was a problem.
Mr. Cummings, was a problem because Mr. Beale, based on the evidence based on the suspicions that were given to us on February 11th, it was clear to us there was a lot of evidence pointing to massive fraud against the agency. And a lot of this evidence was available, should have been referred to us much, much earlier. Specifically, the problem we had with the Office of Homeland Security, the gentleman or representatives of that office interviewed Mr. Beale twice and had 3 other contacts with him. And that's basic 101 in law enforcement investigations. You never interview the target of the investigation until you have all your facts in a row. And our investigation was severely hampered because Mr. Beale was alerted that
he had a heads up.
Was up. Exactly.
And finally, just to give credit where credit is due, this fraud had been going on for decades under both Republican and Democratic administrations. Is that right?
That's correct, sir.
But it was Administrator McCarthy who finally exposed it. Is that right?
To my knowledge, Ms. McCarthy was the first person, executive at EPA, that ever questioned Mr. Beale's relationship to the CIA.
And so you credit her for exposing it. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
In your opinion, is it possible that this fraud could have gone undiscovered if it were not for Administrator McCarthy's actions? That's my last question.
I think it's highly likely, had it not been Ms. McCarthy raising the alarm, this never would have been discovered.
So Beale, he'd be still getting money, huh? Big time.
Yes, sir.
All right. If I could follow up on the gentleman very briefly, because it's the same exact question, slightly differently. If Mr. Beale had simply retired and not tried to get greedy and keep taking a full paycheck, he also would never have been discovered because he'd have been gone for over a year before the administrator would have even thought to ask. Is that right?
That is 100% correct, Mr. Chairman.
So is that the old pigs get fat, hogs get slaughtered? I guess we should be happy he was that greedy. We now go to the gentleman from Utah, Mr. Chaffetz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. Mr. Persepi, I hope I pronounced your name properly. When did you say there was some
Just pretend there's an H after the C.
Thank you. Okay. When did you said that the first time you had heard about it, there was some scuttle or some discussion with senior administrators that about Mr. Beale. When did that happen?
Sometime in 2012, the idea of trying to find out what the real arrangements were here.
So can you give, 2012 is the beginning of the year, spring, beginning of the year, fall?
It wasn't at neither end, so it must have been somewhere in the middle. But
so somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, probably when?
I was going to say I could probably say that it was probably more than the middle of the year, but I don't really know.
Okay, so June, July-ish type, is that fair? Okay, middle of the year. And Ms. McCarthy was aware of that as well? Gina McCarthy was aware of that as well?
The conversation was about whether or not we should proceed with trying to figure out, not whether or not, but that she was going to proceed, and I encouraged it to proceed to find out what was going on.
So it's the middle of 2012. You encourage her to proceed to figure out whether or not this is accurate.
I was agreeing with her.
You were agreeing with her. Now go back, if we can put up slide 4D, the date on this is March of 2011. I'll do a little pullout here. This is from Mr. Beale to Gina McCarthy. You mentioned the and so he's sending this note back to her via email. You mentioned the meeting you have with Intel, et cetera, tomorrow. Do you want to see if I can break away from Langley to attend that meeting with you? I'm not sure, but I'll try if you want. So it's out there. He's perpetuating this myth that he's at the CIA. By mid-2012, Gina McCarthy knows about it. He directly reports to Gina McCarthy. You're encouraging Gina McCarthy to pursue this, but it's not until spring or until late winter. It's in the January or February, March timeframe of 2013 that she actually inquires about this, and the IG is telling us they figured it out in a week. I don't understand, and again, Mr. Chairman, this is why I think we need Gina McCarthy here, why it took her 8 months, at least, if not more. It looks like she had known about this for a couple of years. It's her direct report. And remember, Mr. Chairman, during this time, he's never even showing up to work. The guy didn't show up for years, not a single day. And he's being paid at a pay level above and beyond what's allowed by statute. I think she has at least some responsibility and some questions to answer. Now, my time's short, I'm sorry. Mr. Brenner, what was the purchase, when you bought the home with Mr. Beale back in the early 80s, what was the purchase price? Can you please put the microphone on? You'd think he'd have that by now.
I'm sorry, I don't remember the purchase price of the home.
Come on. You don't have any clue what the purchase price of that home was. What was the selling price of that home?
And I don't remember the selling price, but it was
When did you sell that? When did you sell that home?
What I remember is it was done at market values. Mr. Beale purchased my share of the house in the late 1990s.
How much did he pay you for that house?
He paid me somewhere on the order of $30,000 or $40,000.
So your original purchase price, you have no idea what, and you don't know what the sell price is, but he wrote you a check for $30,000 or $40,000. When did you get that $30,000 or $40,000?
I'm sorry, I misunderstood your question. You asked about the price of the house. The portion that I put into the purchase of the house was somewhere around $10,000 in 1983 or 4, somewhere in there. And then when Mr. Beale decided to purchase my share of the house, it was for a number like $30,000 or $40,000 about 14 years later.
So you get $30,000 or $40,000 from this person. Are you still friends?
We are.
When's the last time you saw him, besides today?
I've seen Mr. Beale periodically over the last, well, actually, I've seen him a lot over the last 2 weeks, because when he left the hospital after his throat problems, because he had rented out his house in Arlington, he's staying in my guest room now.
Mr. Chairman, this is just an unbelievable story. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. The gentleman is recognized.
What did you say?
He's staying in his guest house.
Beale is staying, wait a minute. I know I didn't hear that. Beale is staying in your guest house?
Mr. Cummings, Mr. Beale needed a place to live in the area as he goes through these court proceedings, and his house that he had is rented out. And so—
You mean this is the guy that just paid the federal government $850-some thousand? He didn't have no place to go, and he's about to pay another $500-some thousand. He didn't have any place to go, so he came to you?
That's correct. That I agreed that he could stay in our guest room when he has either court proceedings, hearings, medical issues.
Are you married?
In the area.
Your wife agreed to that?
Yes, she did.
Okay.
You have a very understanding wife. The gentlelady from New York.
Thank you.